I would like to welcome everyone to today's technical workshop on PISA for development and its out-of-school component. My name is Tua Holgreen. I'm the project manager for PISA at the OECD, and I have been invited to guide us through the first part of today's workshop. The purpose of today's workshop is to look at the results of the Pisadi household survey pilot, to share experience learned with the project from around the world, and also to look forward towards a roadmap for conducting learning and skills assessments through household surveys in the future. The workshop today follows the launches of the international results of the Pisadi household survey pilot and the national reports of Guatemala and Honduras, which were made on Tuesday this week. The national reports for Paraguay and Senegal will be made on the 9th and the 17th of December, respectively. We have 4 sessions over the next 3 hours. The first session is an introduction and scene setting. The second session will give a closer look at the results of the PISA-D household survey component and the experiences from participating countries. Then in the third session, we will have an opportunity to ask questions to our panels and discuss the findings. And in the fourth session, we will be looking forward. And first, we will have an update on the collaboration between international organizations on the measuring of learning through household surveys, and then discuss the roadmap towards the future. First, I would like to now introduce Andreas Schleicher, the Director for Education and Skills at the OECD, who will give us today's first presentation.
Thank you so much, Tua, and I would like to express my thanks also to all participants. This has been an amazing collaboration among many players, institutions who have, shared their expertise, their resources to make this work, and most importantly, the countries that are the pioneers of this exercise. It takes a lot of courage for a minister to actually not only acknowledge that many young people are not in school, but also acknowledge how badly they have been neglected. It is the very first time that we do have an assessment of the learning outcomes of those not in school on an international comparative standard. And I think it's a very significant achievement. It raises the goalpost. If we talk about education for all, it means all, and it can't just mean that we measure what is easy to measure as part of our regular statistical system. So formidable achievement. My thanks to everyone involved, the international organizations, and most importantly, the countries that participated in this. The problem is not small. In fact, let me just start with just highlighting the numbers that we are talking about. These are millions of numbers, 67 millions of young people, if you add this all up across the levels of education. And it has diminished clearly since the year 2000, but actually progress is sort of stalled. If you look at the figures from 2012, 14, 16, they are very, very similar. It seems an uphill struggle to ensure that students enroll up to the end of compulsory education. And that's something that we see in PISA. When we look at actually the share of 15-year-olds that are covered by PISA, you can see on average it looks okay, it's 88%, but then it goes down to up to a minority of 15-year-olds. So when we say, well, the education system in country X compares in a certain way, if we are, actually accurate, we should be saying the performance of students who are enrolled in school in country X do so and so well. So you can see we are not talking about a tiny minority in every country. Some students are excluded, and in others, in some countries, is actually a lot of students. Now, what you can do about this problem is you can guess now how would those students have performed. That's some people have done that. We have done that too at the OECD, assuming students not in school achieve a certain level of education. But obviously, that's not very accurate, and that's pure, really guesswork. And again, if SDG 4 goal is making education inclusive, leaving no one behind, then there is really no substitute for actually assessing the skills of the whole population. So that is actually what PISA-D, the out-of-school component, has been able to do. It has looked at the population of 14 to 16-year-olds who are not enrolled in school in the countries, taken a household survey and given them a test where students preferred a digital version. They could do that on a tablet, laptop, where they preferred, to fill a paper questionnaire. They could do that as well. And the first countries that have actually ventured to do this were Guatemala, Honduras, Panama, Paraguay, and Senegal. And once again, they should be commended for the courage they have taken to put those marginalized students and learners on the map. Let me just sort of highlight why, students around the age of 15, the PISA age, are no longer in school. For some, they never went to any form of schooling. Now you can see in Senegal, it's 1 out of 5. For some, they dropped out of primary school. For some, they dropped out still, not completing primary school. A lot of students left after completing primary school. And then you have also secondary dropouts and so-called fade-outs, students who sort of fizzle out of the system. They drop partially out, even though they may remain formally enrolled. And then you do have a good share of students who make it up to the target age of PISA and who are then assessed in the regular PISA. But what I'm saying is basically is half of the students, half of the 14 to 16-year-old population who fall under this category of out of school learners. So it is a significant share of young people that we are talking about. And what do we know about it? Then, the question, of course, is when we have given this test, administered it, what do you find out? And you can actually map those different zones, those different reasons for exclusion against the performance on the out-of-school test. And this is what you get. Now you can see actually that performance varies a lot across those different zones. As you would expect, students who are in school, who are basically part of the regular PISA test, they did a lot better. You have at least, on average, about 40% of students who reach the baseline level of performance, the kind of foundation skills in PISA, the SDG4, foundation. But you do also have a lot of students in this age group who have gone through education, remained enrolled, who do not reach this. And if I can just sort of give you a taste of what students can do, if you are in the very dark red zone, that's a few students, we can't even know what those children are knowing. They are basically below what PISA is capable of accurately measuring. If you're at the next level, the large kind of segment of students that are scoring at level 1C, these are students who would typically be able to decode and understand a very short sentences. For example, the red car has a flat tire. Now, they can decode and understand the meaning of such a simple sentence. If you get to the orange bar, now that's level 1B, students could understand short texts. They also could find a single piece of information that is explicitly stated in that text. For example, what color is the car? They read that sentence before, they can see red. If you get to yellow, that's level 1A. That's basically students who can also identify the main idea, the main theme of an author's intent in the text, but only about topics they're quite familiar with. And then again, you get to the baseline level accomplishment of SDG4, where you can say that students can read and understand simple texts, they can connect pieces of information, they can draw inferences beyond what is explicitly stated in the text. So that gives you a sense of what those students can do. And here in the case of Panama, you can see for those in school, it's almost 40% who reach that baseline, but for those who have not made it up to age 14 in 15 in school, you can see only very few manages. Still some do. Now it's quite interesting that actually some students that have only attended a few years or maybe even never, like in zone 1, still you find some who figured out somehow to learn. No, but the large majority do not. So that's basically just to give you a sense of the results. And what you see here for Panama is basically quite representative of what we see in other countries. When we look at this in mathematics, here in Senegal, that's a lower performing education system, but you can see basically this very, very little green. No? Most of the learners that you can see here are in the red or dark red, that who have not been in school. So essentially you can say a large chunk of 14 to 16-year-olds in Senegal do not even have the most essential, skills to work with mathematics, adding, subtracting, multiplying, and so on. Now, one of the things that we have learned from PISA is that actually many or virtually all of the dropouts have repeated grades. Now, they have tried several times. The education system has allowed them in and then, but not made them successful, not given them the support to actually succeed. And at some point, then probably they dropped out of this. Now, you can see actually dropout rate is so much higher among the out of school, grade repetition rate is so much higher among the out of school population than among the student population. So that's something I think education policy should take away from this. How can we find better ways to identify the learning needs of young people and then support them where they need support, not to get them into this loop of repeating and repeating and then eventually dropping out. There are also other reasons for a dropout. When we actually asked to what extent the 14 to 16-year-olds surveyed are involved in labor, you can see in all countries, but particularly so in Senegal, it's a very large share. Did you look after young children? Did you take care of one or more sick family members or relatives? Did you cook a family meal? Did you do house cleaning? You can see 60% in virtually all of the countries. Did you wash clothes? Did you fetch water? Did you do family grocery shopping? And those are predominantly activities where girls actually are involved. And then did you collect or chop firewood? Did you take care of livestock? Did you help with the family business without pay? That's more typically where you see boys involved. But what I wanted to show you here is that the bars are long. So you can see how many economists distract young people from education, from learning, and that may contribute to them not being in school. Now, the more interesting question that we ask is, what would you actually get back? What would help actually young people to get back to school? And look at the results here. You can see basically in virtually all countries between 70 and over 80% say it's about better quality of teaching. Helping improving reading skills, a vocational program. Maybe it's about relevance of schooling. Maybe many young people, they are busy, they're needed by their families, they're needed by the economy. They would want to see an education that is more clearly linked to the world of work. So the kind of vocational kind of pathway here. A school to learn at my own pace. And here you can see it's the mirror image of the dropout, basically before they were rushed through the system, often had to repeat. Learning at my own place, a safer school now. And you can see a lot of data. It's quite discouraging, the share of violence that's experienced by learners now. A school more accepting of student differences. Then the issue of school fees. And when we surveyed parents, that got mirrored in this as well. A school closer to home. Distance is a factor. Now, the average time is over half an hour for many young people, and then there's a very wide distribution. Financial incentives. Is a school accessible to students with disabilities? Support for students, children while attending school. And then last but not least, discrimination, perceived discrimination, and that is particularly affecting girls. So we do have not only a picture of the problems, we do have also some indications from the young people themselves of what would help them come back to continue their education journey. So what are the implications? What PISA-D out of school has shown, we can do that. We can actually build reliable assessments to assess the learning outcomes of young people who are no longer in school. This works, it works well, and it provides reliable data. It's still a very cumbersome, expensive process. Now, that's something I think to work for in the future. How can those instruments be more systematically embedded in existing service rather than doing this additionally? But it's technically feasible, and actually response rates are very good. That was actually very encouraging, that most young people, when you find them and ask them, will you participate? Most of them did that voluntarily. Many did the digital version. That was also interesting, actually, that you would expect, that they might have preferred the paper version, but no, they were quite comfortable with the digital version. We believe that there are a lot of countries that could greatly benefit from an out-of-school assessment. We hope that this will become part of the culture of PISA, that we no longer just, limit our look to those in school, but that we take this inclusive approach and look at everybody's skills. I also think that these results really reveal the full extent of the global learning crisis. Even the students who are in school often have just, unsatisfactory results. Students who spend 10 years in schooling and still cannot read a simple statement or add to numbers. I think there's something severely going wrong. And we know some of the reasons. Responses really need to focus on the most disadvantaged, the excluded, and certainly not just on those who are in schools. Last but not least, someone might say, well, if my education system is poorly performing, shouldn't I first, focus on quality before I expand coverage? And actually, some of the data from PISA is very interesting here. When you look at countries like Brazil or Indonesia or Mexico or Turkey, in the first PISA assessments, they had a minority of 15-year-olds taking part. In the last PISA assessment, it was around the 70s. So they had made remarkable progress in improving coverage. And at the very same time, none of these countries has seen a decline in their learning outcomes. So actually, raising quality and quantity are not mutually exclusive policy objectives. At least that's what I would take away from this. And with this, I pass back to you too. Once again, my thanks to everyone.
Thank you very much, Andreas, for this overview of the results and their implications. And now let me introduce Margaret Clark, who's a senior education specialist at the World Bank and who will give us the next presentation. Please go ahead, Margaret.
Thanks very much too, and thank you, Andreas, for a great summary of the results coming out of the out-of-school survey from PISA for Development. On behalf of the World Bank, I just want to say how proud we were to be part of this exercise. We've been involved from the very beginning, and we really appreciate all the hard work that went into it, particularly on the country side, and how brave these countries have been to really put themselves under a global microscope, so to speak, to show what learning levels look like, and then what might be done about it. Just wanted to use this opportunity to kind of reflect on why the World Bank has been so supportive of PISA, what our hopes have been for it over the years, and where I think PISA for Development has really realized a lot of the promise of what we've been hoping for. I'm framing this in terms of a blog that I wrote back in 2013. This will tell you how long PISA for Development was in formation, and this was after Andreas had actually come to the bank to talk with our then director about his vision for what this PISA for Development pilot could bring to the table, and the possibilities for how it could really be a game changer for a lot of the low income and the lower middle income countries that wanted to understand where they benchmark globally, but the current version of PISA just wasn't quite ready or there for them. And of course, this was in the lead up to the Sustainable Development Goal agenda that was released in 2015. So After Andreas's visit, I actually wrote this blog trying to encapsulate some of what the World Bank was really hoping to get from this ambitious exercise that Andreas had laid out. So here are the three wishes. And basically, the first one is asking, can this be a test with questions that 15-year-olds in emerging and developing economies can actually answer? So getting at the difficulty level of the existing PISA exercise. Second one, the cost issue. Can this somehow lead to a test that these countries can afford? And number three, and kind of feeding into the whole atmosphere around the formation of the Sustainable Development Goal for education, and knowing that it was going to shift from an access focus to more of a learning focus, can this PISA for Development pilot translate into a test that contributes to the Learning for All agenda? We actually commissioned a report, an analysis to try to seed some of the reasons behind why these were three key issues to look at, and that we hoped PISA for Development would address. So this first wish, the issue of the difficulty level of the questions, this is from a report we commissioned to specifically look at the experience of the lower and middle income countries that had participated in PISA between its inception in 2000 and up to 2012. And when you can see here, over on the left-hand side, you see the OECD average for the percentage of students scoring either at level 1 or below level 1 on the PISA 2012 math test. And you can see as you move towards the right, and these are more of the lower middle income countries, that the size of the gray bar increases. So basically, this was an area where the existing PISA test wasn't able to capture what those students knew and could do. So it's definitely, there was a kind of a mismatch between the current ability levels in those countries and what PISA was measuring. In terms of the cost or the affording issue, this was another analysis that we did for this report. And in this, you can see the relative odds of countries participating in PISA by their country characteristics. And basically, I want you to focus in on where you can see the yellow circle. It's showing the odds of lower middle income countries participation, and it's so much lower than the odds for the upper and higher income countries. Now, one contribution to that fact that these countries, and there's not even any low income countries shown in this, that the cost was certainly a factor, and how you finance participation in PISA, and is it worth it, given what you've already seen in the previous chart, that you may not get much information from the exercise. And then the third wish, a test that contributes to learning for all. Given that a lot of World Bank client countries and countries that would benefit from the SDG agenda, a lot of them, as you can see in the gray parts of this map, again, it's from the same report, that we just weren't getting. It was like there was a black box here in terms of information on whether students in those countries were learning, at least data on learning that could be globally referenced or globally benchmarked. So we wanted to see, can PISA for Development become a test that actually gives you information on where students are at in their learning levels, will be affordable, and can actually start filling in some of these gaps in terms of global understanding of where students in every country are at in basic skills. So moving on, looking at the results that have come out, both of the in-school and the out-of-school components of the PISA for Development pilot. Here you can see one of the great developments, I think, that has come out of the initiative is the ability to parse lower levels of performance in a way that's more meaningful. Here you can see, this is actually from Senegal's data for the out-of-school results. But the interesting part of this is the fact that not only do you have a level 1A and a level 1B, but now there's a new level 1C that really, this is a new addition that you can actually start where I showed you the gray bars before. Now you see blue, and this is where we have information. There's actually enough questions on the new version of the test that you can dig more into these lower ability levels and come up with some understanding of what do these students know, what do they not know, and where might be the next step in their learning trajectory. So I think that's been a great achievement. In terms of a test that emerging and developing economies can afford. Now here, I think the issue of cost is one that should be considered, not just from a financial perspective, but also the political cost of participation. And I think the financial side, I mean, you know, PISA, based on the cost of other things that education systems do, the cost of PISA, or indeed any international assessment, is actually not that high. It's a very small percentage. But the thing is, with a constrained budget, not every country, particularly if you're developing, can find the money in their budget to cover the cost. However, if there's political will, and if there's a feeling that the political cost is worth it, then I think countries will be more willing to step up and either work with donors like the bank or find money through other sources to engage. And I think India is a country where they had originally participated in PISA 2009. It hadn't gone so well. But I think after seeing what was coming out of PISA for development, here I think it's a great example of the political cost now, I think, is worth it for India. And India has re-engaged with PISA 2022. And the World Bank is helping to fund this under our new education project we have with India. So I think in terms of cost, I think if you have a test like PISA for development that is politically worthwhile, that people know that if we do this, we are going to get some information that we can use. And also I think the fact that PISA for development and the capacity building components are now modules in future PISA exercises, and that allows you to break out the cost more. Do we want to pay for the cost of capacity building? Do we want to pay for the lead analyst program? I think it helps countries make more informed decisions about how they can parse out the cost of participation and tailor it to their needs. So here I think there has been some really good progress. And then finally, in terms of a test that contributes to learning for all, I mean, Sylvia is going to dig more into how PISA for development and certainly expanding the scope to including information on out-of-school children, how it's really helping to measure SDG 4 better. But I think from a World Bank perspective, I think it's also really helpful for other initiatives that use these data. So this is what you see here is the human capital project that the World Bank launched in 2018 that draws on data from PISA and other international and regional assessments to try to create an index that shows countries how well they're doing in terms of helping their youth realize their education and health potential. PISA data are a really important input to this. Having a PISA that captures out of school learning as well as in-school learning, I think only enhances these kind of indices that are meant to contribute to conversations with countries. So from a bank perspective, this is really helping us have more realistic, useful conversations with our countries. Of course, I mean, as we've seen over the last few months, or over the last year, I mean, COVID-19 has been a game changer in terms of really pushing more children out of school, or knowing that children that are learning from home or supposed to be learning from home are likely not even to return when school reopens, given the economic impact of COVID. And here's some analysis from a World Bank report where, again, we used PISA data to try and capture what would be the impact on learning losses on students, depending on how long the lockdown continues, and going from optimistic to intermediate to pessimistic scenarios. I mean, on a PISA scale, you can see where the red circle is. I mean, the impact could be up to almost half a standard deviation. And here we then measure the implication for SDG 4.1.1 and certainly there could be a big dent on our efforts to try and get all students to the target that they be proficient in reading and math by 2030. Let me just end then with, having gone through 2013, where we started, what our wishes were, where we are now. I think PISA for Development has really helped us achieve a lot of what we wished for back in 2013. But moving forward, I just want to present a challenge to the PISA team and say, going forward and learning from today's workshop, it would be great to think about how can we use the Pisadi instruments, the in-school and out-of-school, and the way they're being incorporated into future PISA exercises to think about ways to use PISA to help countries build back better from COVID-19. What can be done to help countries maybe, drawing more on the out-of-school instrumentation to help them better understand where their youth are at, and then devising policies around that. Number two, I think it would be great to learn from the tablet-based instrument that was used for the out-of-school survey to see, moving forward, how can PISA offer a computer-based adaptive test to all countries that they can be administered anywhere. And referenced India participating in PISA 2022. They're actually doing the paper-based version because they felt they weren't ready to shift to computer-based administration. But I think the story of how a tablet-based assessment was administered successfully to out-of-school youth in Senegal and Guatemala and Honduras and the other countries shows you it can happen. So can we leverage that to help countries like India shift to computer-based in future PISAs? And then the last wish, can this be a test that helps bring out-of-school youth back to school? So we're learning so much. I mean, Andreas's last two slides with the graphs were fantastic, showing what are the reasons that students are out of school and what would help bring them back in. How can we start acting on that information, using it not just to inform our school education policy, but also second chance education, vocational training, and ways to really not just measure what these youth know or don't know and then walk away, but how can we turn this into an opportunity to re-engage with them? So I'll end there, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this fantastic journey, and hope to continue in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret, for this very thoughtful and thought-provoking presentation. And now I'll go straight over to Sylvia Montoya from UNESCO's Institute for Statistics, who is the director there. Sylvia, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you too. And thank you, Andreas, and congratulations to the OECD team. Really, it's really fantastic to be with all of you, and mainly congratulations to the countries. It's really very difficult to get this going, to ask for a budget, to make this happen. Really, congratulations. And I would like to actually to share with you some thoughts about PISA and PISA for Development in particular, and how it helps to monitor SDG 4 targets and commitments, and try to frame how useful this information is in top of what Andreas and Margaret has already highlighted and what is going to be coming as a discussion. So I just want to have a quick reminder about SDG 4. We have to ensure the inclusive and equitable quality education and promote the lifelong learning and opportunities for all by 2030. And we have there 7 targets and 3 means of implementation. Actually, for us, for UNESCO, 10 targets. And these are in SDG 4, but we have also one target that is in SDG 1, that is about poverty, that is about the proportion of total government spending on essential services. If you look at the targets, they are looking at the whole long life cycle. We're talking about skills and learning in basic education. We're talking about relevant skills for decent work. We're talking about equality, literacy and numeracy, and also as well to look at other aspects that are very important for sustainable development and global citizenship. And we're looking at the means that we have to actually to achieve that. And there is a clear, well-established, and obviously OECD, World Bank, and many other stakeholders and countries are part of this monitoring framework that we have. We have 12 global indicators in SDG 4. We have 1 global indicator in SDG 1. We have a shared commitment between the agencies in actually in being custodian of those indicators, though the UIS UNESCO has a kind of a really large share of those one as a custodian and aggregating and sharing and brokering this effort of all of us. And we have ITU, OECD, and UNICEF on sharing this. And we have also a thematic framework. The education state community has put together a set of indicators that are a menu of options that are actually helping to understand what happened with those global indicators. And we have a platform for collaboration. We work together in developing the methodologies, in trying to see how to refine them and try to better inform the progress of SDG 4. This is co-convened by the UNESCO Institute for Statistics by us and UNESCO as a headquarters, as a secretariat for this, the UNESCO Institute for Statistics. We're facilitating this work. We have met 1 month ago, and we have actually come with some interesting developments in using learning assessment data to actually to help to monitor SDG 4. We have a reporting framework there that is actually produced by the UN Secretary General, the report that is coming annually, but also having SDG 4 the duty of actually monitoring and progress of the colleagues of the Global Education Monitoring Report. And just coming to the indicator that is actually informed by PISA and PISA for Development, we're very excited about having the results for out-of-school children for the countries today, and it's really a good opportunity to highlight that this, we have the first indicator in the target. We actually have 2 indicators in target 1 since March. We have the proportion of children and young people in grades 2 and 3 at the end of primary and at the end of lower secondary, achieving at least a minimum proficiency level in reading and mathematics by sex. This is a critical indicator. It's one of the main indicators in the agenda to look at how reading and mathematics are in basic education. And I just want to call attention, and these are some of the issues that are under discussion, what indicator actually means to communicate. It's just not a number in a table. It's about description of the percentage of kids that are able to meet some minimum proficiency standards in 2 relevant domains that are basic or foundational to the rest of the areas that we have to manage to actually for a successful and meaningful life, and as an individual and at the society level. When also we have some standards where these different programs can be considered comparable to each other, but it's also related not only to contents and results, but also to procedures and standards for this data to really be comparable. And we have for that to have a definition of the common contents and ability. We have a definition of procedures, what procedures are good enough to actually to make the data comparable. And we have a reporting that is based on this definition of the minimum proficiency level. And I just want to highlight that we're talking about the minimum proficiency level. We're talking about the minimum set of skills for actually being able to succeed. And we're very happy. This December seems to be 2020, a fantastic month for us that want to have data to report and to understand what is happening and how the progress is happening in the indicator at the level of 411 at the end of lower secondary. We're going to have when information coming from the component, and we're going to be actually pairing with some 2019 results. So we are going to have a very rich set of information to track and to monitor in the progress, and this is the first of the type we're going to have about out-of-school children. So with that, I just want to call attention to some of the issues that are going to be at the center of our discussion and some of the wishes that Margaret has shared with us, that we're joining in actually sharing those wishes and being actually hopeful that we're going to have more information and looking forward to hearing some of the discussion, is that we have a coverage for the indicator 411C. As we could see from the map of the current reporting of the indicator, we're having many gaps in some continents that are information that we're not having about the results for this indicator, and obviously is obviously influenced by how many kids that are out of school and not completing for those levels, and the effort that is costing the assessment in terms of the capacities of the countries. And we also know the results that we are having for some of the information we have. That is the fact that some of these unfortunately are very low in some regions of the world. And so for this reason, it's going to be very rich to have more information about the level of skills of the kids who are in and out of school related to those levels. And we also know related to the kids who are not learning in this moment and who are really how they are distributed among the numbers of kids who are not in school, that those kids are located in some regions. We know that in Africa and in South Asia, and so in some part of also Latin America, we have important numbers of kids who are out of school. For this reason, it's going to be important to have information of those skills. And this actually, this figure that is actually connected to the one that Andreas was showing to us and Margaret as well, is showing the percentage of kids who are really, for which we have information today and for which we don't have information. We know that there are many kids that are not completing and basically they are not in school in some regions. And you could see that in some regions, like especially Sub-Saharan Africa, Western Asia, North Africa, we have that the percentage of kids that are in the red, dark red and light red are the kids who are for which we do not have information because they don't reach the levels that as which we are measuring. And for this reason is also again a contribution that PISA for development is going to be in the out of school children component, going to inform us and to provide information to actually to have a more precise information on this. But I just want to have and to call attention in my last slide about the fact that the PISA and PISA for development are also contributing to other indicators that have been considered as important to track and to monitor on the progress of SDG 4, that are indicators related to some aspects or some condition and factors or drivers about the explaining the performance of the kids. We have indicator 452, that is percentage of students in primary education so far that we have the first or home language as language of instruction. This indicator in the technical cooperation group has been proposed to be expanded to inform also for the students who are in secondary education. And this indicator is collected and we have information that is coming from the questionnaire in PISA. We have also information about the kids who are experiencing bullying in the last 12 months. This indicator again is reported only for one level and now is under refinement because we have asked to report this indicator for primary and secondary education. And then again, learning assessment and PISA in particular is also going to be helping to inform among other sources coming from other global and regional assessments. We have indicator 47, that is a percentage of teachers who receive in-service training in the last 12 months. Again, this indicator is coming for some of the contextual questionnaires that are in learning assessment and in particular in PISA. And we have also information related to school that is going to be coming also for the component of a school in school students that is also associated to PISA. That is a proportion of a school offering basic services by type of services. This indicator is under the consideration of the interagency and expert group to the SDG. It's going to be discussed actually today in a few minutes about the possibility to use learning assessment and PISA information also to report for this indicator. And we have one very important contribution that is coming from all these sources of information from PISA and for PISA for development in particular, that is all the information about equity, to try to understand the different aspects that are related to socioeconomic status, to gender, to location, is offering to us a very rich source of information to understand inequalities and to try to look at how this could help us to inform better and the policymakers and the international community to help to actually to thrive and to achieve SDG 4. So we see a very important contribution, and it's for us very for the UIS, for the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, on behalf of my team, again, congratulations for this huge effort from the OECD, but mainly from the countries in actually reaching this point. Thank you, and we wish that the rest of the discussion is going to be as rich as the results we are releasing today. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks to you, Sylvia. Thank you very much for this presentation. With that, we conclude the first of today's sessions. We will now go over to session 2, which will be steered by Yuri Belfali, who is the head of division for early childhood and schools at the OECD. Yuri, please.
Thank you, Chue, and hello, everybody. After this excellent introduction session, which set the stage of the discussion, the following discussions, now we will get into the session where we listen to countries who participated in the PISA for Development out of school assessment and learn from their experiences, their lessons. I would like to also highlight that this is probably one of the most exciting sessions of this workshop. Building on the introduction presentation given by Andreas, we will hear also more about the results of each country, how they interpret that, but also what kind of policy discussions they are intending to have drawing on the results of the PISA for Development out of school assessment. So for this session, we have a list of great speakers. Edgar Noriega from Guatemala, Vilma Reyes from Honduras, Nadia de Leon from Panama, Veronica Heilborn from Paraguay, and Massar Diop from Senegal. These are the colleagues who led the development and implementation of the PISA for Development out of school assessment in these countries. And I would like to also take this opportunity to give them a big applause, because it was really their efforts to make it happen and go through different challenges that we have experienced together, overcome any issues, try this new assessment, and let the operation to be a successful one. So I would like to express our big thanks to these colleagues and invite them to present the cases of each country. So with this, I'd like to invite the first speaker, Edgar from Guatemala. Edgar, please.
Hello, everyone. I am Edgar Montufar Noriega from Guatemala team. In this presentation, I am interested in talking to you about 4 topics. Why did Guatemala participate in the out of school June assessment? Experience during PISA-D out of the school? Analysis and data and preparation of national reports. And I want to share you results who are in school and who are out of school. So, why did Guatemala participate in the out of the school June assessment? Add new indicators to the educational policy debate is important. In Guatemala, there has been an interest in access to education. For this reason, the coverage indicators are permanently present, but there had been no information on the completion of the compulsory education. What about people who drop out of school? Where are they? What can we do so that the students do not drop out of the school? Does the educational system offer an educational alternative to complete the minimum education? Identify the learning levels of out-of-school young and the barriers to schooling that exist in the country. Coverage Index 3 indicates the percentage of 50 years old in 7th grade or more. In Guatemala, we are always concerned about the coverage of primary school enrollment, but we did not have an international indicator of the completion of compulsory education, 9th grade in the case of that country. We need to have these indicators and have mechanisms to monitor progress in which a large population of age school in completing compulsory education. Provide information that allow decision making to reduce the out of school population, but also for the people who did not complete compulsory education. can complete it by reaching minimum levels of reading and mathematics. The educational prosperity approach inspired the contextual questionnaire for PISA-D. This approach considers the conditions needed to education system to help students' success in the school and in life. It identifies a set of 4 key outcomes called prosperity outcomes for each stage of schooling and child development, health and well-being, attitudes towards school and learning, educational attainment, and academic performance. The prosperity approach also identified a set of family, institutional, and community factors called foundations for success that influence these outcomes: inclusive environments, learning time, quality instruction, family and community support, and resource. The educational prosperity approach allows us to overcome PISA vision of outcomes in math, reading, and science. It allows to communicate more complex results, but also more human. Usually, math, reading, and science data gets all the attention and puts the teacher in the spotlight. But the educational system is more complex. Evaluating the educational system is evaluating the social justice in a society. This approach allows communicate results to teachers, but also to families and authorities. The sampling. The sampling used the household survey as reading and math assessment. The universe of census cluster is held by the Instituto Nacional de Estadística, INE. For this reason, it was necessary to work with them in order to have access to the sample. The National Survey of Living Conditions in COVID was very useful to have some data on the population aged 14 to 16 years out of the school. According to data from the National Survey of Living Conditions in COVID, 2014 approached 41% of the people of 50 years are out of the school and 8% are still in primary school, is 6th grade or less. These local calculations are close to those made for coverage index 3. INCOVI pointed out that 7.5% of the population in Guatemala is between 40 and 16 years old, and that of every 100 people, 3 were young people between 14 and 16 years old. They are out of the school. This information allows determining the number of clusters we need to obtain the sample of young people between 14 and 16 years old who were abroad in the limited representative samples. No problem on the student in 6th grade or below, as they are on record and we found them at the school, but the location sampling were very difficult to the team. The team of interview. The team of interview was made up of personnel from the Ministry of Education, but also external persons hired to interview. All have experience in interview students in school, but very few in household surveys. All had experience in tests on paper, but not on the tablet. Therefore, it was necessary to have training by INE, who taught cartography and census in the cluster. They trained us for 4 weeks, 2 in the field trial and 2 in the main survey. It was also necessary to train to use the tablet too, screening, interviews, and evaluation. In 2 clusters, they were not allowed to enter the interview team due to fear. One was in rural area with a low socioeconomic level and other in an urban area with a high socioeconomic level. But in a cluster located in very dangerous area, the interview team managed to talk to the gang leaders and allowed them to conduct the interviews. Analysis of data and preparation the national report. The participating in the lead analysis program was key to working on the report. The template report provides guidance, but the exchange with analysts from other countries and the OECD made it possible to will get a better document. We are currently using some analytical process in the national assessment. Also, the importance of having an educational prosperity approach that guides the data analysis process. The experience of the Strand IE report guide in the development of the out of the school report. Finally, I want to share with you one of the resource to share the results of PISA-D. You can see that link. We use that page to present the results. Is the results of Strand E and is talk about the results in the assessment. In 2009 in Guatemala, there were 360,000 students with 7 years of primary education. All school-age boys and girls had access to primary education with the expectation that at least they will complete the basic cycle. Now, 9 years later, we want to know what happened to them. To understand it better, we are going to use a school bus and as explained, and this will represent the educational system. Get on the educational bus in this 9 years journey. The first issue is the government investment in education. The government spends $6,000 on 10 years of education. It is one of the lowest. And you can read the history of Julia Mendez. She is from low level socioeconomic, very low. His parents cannot read. She lives in rural area and the structure of the school is poor and the classroom has very many students. She is very common. She go out to the bus. Young welfare influence. And you see the story of Rosana Martinez. She's level of socioeconomic is low. His parents, her mother and father cannot read. She lives in rural area. The school have a poor structure. The classroom has very many students and the teacher comes later. So you can see, you can continue with the stories and the shared in the link. Only half all 7 years old boys and girls who start the first grade be in 7th grade or higher. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing the experience of Guatemala, including a very creative way of communicating the results. That was really impressive, but also that gives us a question how we can put the human faces on the statistics to drive discussions for change. So thank you very much for sharing that experience. Now I would like to invite the next speaker, Vilma Reyes from Honduras. Vilma, please.
What we are going to talk about right now is the reasons why Honduras joined the PISA-D school assessments, Honduras' experience of implementing the out-of-school assessment and the analysis of the data preparation of the national report, the results of the assessments, the key findings, and the key lessons from Honduras' experience with externcy. The reasons why Honduras joined the PISA-D out-of-school assessments. First of all, it gains an understanding of how Honduras students' performance compare internationally, and in particular, how it compares with the students' performance in countries facing similar challenge. Develop insights into how to help students in Honduras learn better, teachers teach better, and school systems to operate more effectively, that the educational system improve in a better way. Gain an understanding of the learning level of how out of schools youth and the barriers to schooling that exist in countries. Build capacity to conduct large-scale learning assessments and analyze and use the results to support national policies and evidence-based decision-making. Okay, Honduras experience have some achievements. Developing the instruments and adapting this for Honduras. Sampling, we made all the tasks to get the PSUs, where we made a mini census to get the, the youth. Every interviewer was going to go to all the PSUs that they are going to that they have to do. So, sampling, preparing the delivery platform and tablets computer. Installing the software on each tablet and entering the guide maps that the interviewers used to locate in PSU was one of the best challenge that we have. Selection and training of interviewers. All were selected according to the profile of the reference terms. The field trial and analysis of results, and we got the main survey data collections. And finally, we got data processing and cleaning. Honduras challenge. The software. At the beginning, we had some problems of installing the software, but we can fix them with Paul's help. Thanks, Paul. Resource. In country costs. Logistics, we made a great plan for conducting the process. Security, safety was one of the most complicated issues because the interviewers were in risky areas. Thank God we don't have serious incidents. The analysis of data and preparation of national reports. First of all, we were participating in Pisadi lead analyst program from April to September 2018. The preparation and launch of national report was from strength A, B, and in 2018. Analysis of strength data and preparation of updating national reports and comparing analysis of data from strand A, B, and C. And finally, we got the launch on 1st of December 2020. Now we're going to talk about some results. Strand C population by exclusion zones. You can see that 5% of the youth that were interviewed, they have never enrolled in the educational system. 21% left the educational system in the first grades of basic education. The 18% within the system, but in grades lower than 7th grade. The 42% drop out of school after completing the second cycle of basic education. The 11% drop out of school during the third cycle of basic education, and the 3% enrolled in school in the 7th grade or higher, but they attend it irregularly. What is the reading performance, strength reading performance? The ones that are, we can see a comparison of youth that were in school in grades lower than 7th and the out of school youth. We can see that we have a 45% of the youth in the level 1B, and out of school. In school, we have the 42%. We can see that out of school are have a little bit of great things. In math, we can see also the strengths in math performance, where they are in the level 1B in both in school and out of school. The youth performance by gender. In the results obtained by youth out of schools in both domains, reading and mathematics, there were no significant difference in performance according to the genders. So we have some difference, but they are not significant. The grade repetition. 86% of the youth out of school who were interviewed say that they repeat some of the grades in both the second and the third cycle of basic education as a previous step to leaving the school. The main reasons why youth attribute that they are out of school is, the first one is poverty. The second one is quality of education. The work activities, they have to go and work with their families, and on safety, when they have some they don't have safe in their schools. Youth's opinions about getting back to school. They tell that they can go back to school if there is no discrimination, if there is a safety school, if there is free enrollment, financial incentives, existence of schools with the personal's attention, and better quality teaching. Conclusions. 58% of the youth who do not attend schools express that they would return if accepted the difference between students. 5% of out-of-school youth had never enrolled in school, and youth who do not attend a school are more likely than students to report low satisfaction with life. The recommendations were strengthen the inclusion in education of disadvantaged youth people to achieve a sense of belonging to the educational center for all children and young people. Design systems to motivate, attract, develop, and retain high-quality teachers and schools leaders, and create a work organization in which they can thrive. Continue with the monitoring of systematic evaluation process to determine the effectiveness of teaching training on quality. And last one, improve the quality of students entering the teaching professions and the quality of preserving training. Some key lessons that we have from Honduras is that the experience of the participation during the development of PISA-D is a number of individual and collective learning, among which we identify those that can revert to learn for the institutions. We have the budget allocation according to the planned activities. We have new ways of developing tests to determine the levels of achievement in learning. And as an institution, the Ministry of Education of Honduras had never carried out an evaluation of youth out of school, so there was no prior knowledge of how to carry out this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vilma. It was also an excellent presentation, and you nicely highlighted the policy implications specific to Honduras, putting light on the key results from the study. There are some questions for you, but we will wait until the next session. So I would like to invite the next speaker, Nadia De Leon, Ministry of Education from Panama. Nadia, please.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be able to share with you a little bit about Panama's experience with PISA-D. First of all, I would like to say that it's been an honor to be Panama's PGB, but I joined the team right at the end of the process with PISA 2018. So I was not the person who implemented this process. It was led by Agnes Cotes, who was the NPM for PISA-D Strand C in Panama, and Gina Garces, who is our National Evaluation Director, and all those applauses should really go to them, who did an excellent job. And I am happy and honored to present today for them the work that they did during the application process and what we have been doing since then for analysis and the use of the data since then. So first of all, I'd like to share the context that Panama had participated in PISA in 2009. So this wasn't our first time participating, but then we had a long gap of not participating until 2018 when we participated again. And we participated in the regular PISA program, as well as doing the component C of PISA-D. So we also wanted to account for the students who were outside of the school system. And we did this in order to avoid those blind spots. As was said in the beginning, utilizing a sample of students who attend school to draw the conclusions regarding our entire system could lead to wrong interpretation. When we compare different countries, especially those where most children attend school to those where that is not the case. And we saw an image earlier actually of how different countries compare in those terms. And we could see that Panama was second to last in that comparison. So you could already see one strong reason for Panama to consider this. So the results that we would have if we didn't also include the out of school component would not also reflect the true progress that could have happened for the educational improvements if we continue doing both parts in terms of also trying to reach the students who are outside of the school system in other ways. So it would be important not only to do it this time, but to continue doing it too, because we want them to return to school, but also if some of them don't return to school, we should also have alternative ways to reach them too. And without doing that, we would not be able to reflect the true impact of inequality in Panama, despite being a rather high income country, especially for the Latin American context. It's a country with huge inequality, and that is a very important component for us to take into account. And without doing this, we would not be able to account for existing or proposed exclusion policies and other policies that we may want to take into account in regards of school dropouts and returning policies and other programs that we may place into effect in terms of this important issue for our country. So to give you a sense of where Panama stands in terms of Latin America, for example, Chile, as you can see at the top of this graph, has most of their students that would participate in PISA in the school system. And it's maybe a little over 10% of their 15-year-olds are outside of the school system and therefore would not participate in the regular PISA system. And on the other hand, in Panama, nearly 50% of our 15-year-olds are not enrolled in school. That means that our PISA participation gives us very valuable data, but only gives us very valuable data about half of our youth. And that is clearly not sufficient. So we endeavored in trying to get both pictures at the same time. So doing this, of course, just like our previous two presenters, included very thorough and complicated planning. It was the same cases in Guatemala, for example, here, the data regarding where these youth were and where their houses were is housed at our also Institute of National Statistics. And so this required quite a bit of coordination to find the sample, to find the information, to map it out, and hiring all those who went out and did the testing and gathering the data and training all of them, and building the database to prepare the data and then put it into the database as we collected the data and carried out all these home visits also using the tablets. And Panama is a small country, but it is a country that still has many areas that are what we call out of reach. There isn't good road access at all, as you can see in one of these pictures. And these are precisely the areas we wanted to target, because these are the areas where there is the lower school attendance. So there was a very strenuous effort to reach these areas. And then of course, all the team effort of loading and coding this data and analyzing it to produce our country reports, which includes both our regular PISA results and the PISA-D Strand C results for the youth who were out of school. So in our case, we had around 17,000 homes selected. 71% of that sample were in the indigenous regions in Panama, representing the 3 largest indigenous communities in Panama, because the background information that we have indicated that the highest school dropout rates were located there. And then we also had about 25% of the sample in urban and rural areas in some of our other provinces outside of the urban center of Panama City and its surroundings. Only about 3.5% of the sample was in the province of Panama and the surrounding areas of the city. So in the end, the sample that we attained, the required minimum was that we needed to achieve was 1,600 tests and parent questionnaires, and our sample has around 2,000 that we achieved with a combination of the random and convenience samples. So in many cases, they were also when we were able to reach one youth, they would guide us to others. But the sample that we did end up is representative only of the rural areas and the indigenous areas, which were the ones we were most interested in, but it is not representative of the urban areas. So we do still have a bit of a blind spot there to look at in the future. So in general, I think it's important to put into context how did the youth in school do for comparison too, but to keep that in mind, comparing to the rest of Latin America, this is where Panama stands. In comparison to the rest of Latin America, we still have a huge challenge in terms of our results. And then in terms of the results for Pcb Component C, those who were out of school, I also want to share with you kind of how they were distributed. About 14% had never attended school, and only about 5% had abandoned school early in elementary school. And we also had another 14% who were still in school, but in early elementary, and a larger chunk of about 17% who abandoned school after completing elementary school. And the biggest percentage, nearly half, 47%, had abandoned school during middle school. And seeing earlier the graphs of how this compares to other countries, I can see that our situation of that dropout rate in middle school seems to be much worse than the other countries that have shared. And that's it's interesting to see that it's not the case in other countries. So we do have a huge dropout situation right during middle school, but precisely right at 9th grade. And for context, also in Panama, I say maybe in many of the other participating countries, but not everywhere, required education, which is obligatory only on through 9th grade, not to 12th grade. And many drop out right at 9th grade and don't continue on to 10th grade. That is our moment of the biggest dropout. And then we also have a very few small 3%, around 3%, who are still in school in 7th grade or later, but who are not assisting regularly, and so they don't qualify to participate in the regular PISA process. So how did this youth do? Here we have them separated by those zones of inclusion, right? At the top, we have for comparison those who participated in the regular PISA test. And then underneath that, you can see those who are in 7th grade or higher, but who are not assisting regularly. That's zone 6. And then underneath that, 5 and below, you can see those who are out of school in some way. And in yellow, you can see those who have achieved that minimum standard of learning based on the standards agreed upon for the use of PISA too. And here you can see that the vast majority of those who are not in school are not achieving this minimum standard that we would consider sufficient. And it varies a little bit between groups. And this is for reading, and is slightly different for math, which is this other one. And we have a bit of an interesting situation where we can see also that youth who have never been to school are also learning, definitely. And it reminds us that there's ways to learn that are not always the traditional ways to learn in school, and that we can keep in mind that as we approach policy issues, and as well as we address what's happening in schools, and whether those who are still in the school system, particularly in that adult education or night schools, as we call them in Panama, and how they are learning or not learning, and what we can do to improve that backup system that catches some of them who drop out of school but try to return in some moments. So in general, overall, I guess the most important number for us to keep in mind is that approximately 3% of youth out of school system in Panama reach that minimum learning standard established by the OED's agreements for the education standards. And that is such a low percentage for us to keep in mind. So we already have a huge issue with those who are in school, because many of them are still not achieving those standards that we would consider sufficient for sustainable development goals. But on top of that, then we have about half of the youth who are not in school. And of that half, only 3% are achieving that. And so we need to think about how to avoid school dropouts better, and how to maybe help them return to school, and alternative ways also. Perhaps they may not be able to complete a high school equivalency education, but how can we generate adult education programs that provide sufficient minimum learning standards to meet what we have all agreed for sustainable development goals, that are the minimum learning standards that we all need to function in society. So thinking of how do we do this, we also ask those questions regarding what will help you return to school? What resources would be most helpful for you if you were to return to school? And you can see that there wasn't one thing that most of them would prefer. Everything would be helpful, as you can see in this graph. But in general, perhaps those things that stand out a little bit more are related to financial strains. And that does correlate to other research that we have been carrying out in Panama regarding perceptions as to why youth are dropping out. And luckily, it does also correlate with our main effort to reduce school dropouts, which is conditional cash transfer for those youth who are enrolled in school and are obtaining at least passing grades. And the main goal of that public policy is to keep youth in school. So there does seem to be an alignment regarding the reasons why youth are leaving, and some of the public policies we're implementing. However, there were also other reasons that had more to do with the quality of education and how they perceived it to be relevant or good, and help that they could receive that is related to academic support, such as having help to improve their reading skills. And we could certainly do a better job in providing academic support for those who, for example, may be at risk of having to repeat the grade, so that doesn't have to happen. So thank you very much. That's our presentation.
Thank you very much, Nadia. You showed also an interesting case of Panama, who participates in PISA and also benefited from the PISA for development activities to enrich your understanding of the education situation. As you rightly mentioned, you did this to get rid of the blind spots so that you can see everything, all the challenges that you have. But also one of the pictures that you showed, the truck in a muddy way, was the reality of all the participating countries. I'm sure that everybody have been looking at that picture with smile, remembering the challenges that we had to overcome for this operation. So next speaker is Veronica Heilborn from Ministry of Education, Paraguay. Veronica, please.
Hi, my name is Veronica Heilborn, and I've been the NPM for PISA for Development from the Ministry of Education from Paraguay. Paraguay joined PISA-D after 20 years of large-scale assessment at a national level and as well as a regional level. Our experience with UNESCO and its Latin American laboratory for the evaluation of quality of education was successful in TERCE as well as in the two previous Latin American assessments done before. Having an adapted version of PISA that suited better our educational system's strengths and limitations was certainly an excellent opportunity to assess this target population, which is not yet covered by UNESCO evaluations, as well as to gain experience and skills from the training and technical support within PISA-D project. The out-of-school study was certainly unique. It was the first scale assessment for out-of-school children with similar technical standards as the in-school evaluation, and also with comparable results. Even though the estimated 15-year-old population in Paraguay that is out of school or under 7th grade is around 20%, it was anyways an exceptional chance to gain knowledge and insight about their characteristics and their circumstances too. We really faced a lot of challenges with this new evaluation. As it was an innovative pilot project, it required a big amount of time and effort for the national team to completely understand and adapt several aspects. Sampling is one of them. It was the first time we carried out a household survey of this size, and we required the National Institute of Statistics to help us with all this kind of work. There was also a big array of tasks related to the delivery system and its database, and this was the first computer-based assessment that we carried out in our national center. The first and the only so far. Interviewers' profile were quite different, and we required different recruitment strategies. Interviewers trained faced important difficulties related to IT, to their IT skills. It was quite different from the paper-based assessment we are used to. As other countries already expressed, our Ministry of Education lacked experience in large-scale household surveys. Besides the LAMP experience in 2010, around 2010, that was the only experience we had in household surveys. Data available was also a challenge. The census available data was limited. the census from 2012, along with the continuous home service, provided fundamental data, but didn't allow for disaggregated educational data at primary sampling units level, which was required for us to plan an accurate survey operation. As well, lists and maps of households were slightly outdated, mainly for remote areas. Although the sample design and the selection was done with the best available data possible, these limitations demanded us to draw a bigger sample. Of course, it required important resources to be put in place. This out-of-school study wasn't small, neither cheap. So it was a big challenge for our ministry. In implementation, we also faced some challenges. Sorry. Target population was hard to reach. We were dealing with a target population that was mostly moving and working. It required unusual survey hours and several visits to arrange and complete the assessments. Despite the large number of houses we visited, we didn't manage to reach the expected amount of effectively interviewed youth. We had self-administered questionnaires for families. We know them as PMK, that actually required interviews assistance to be completed due to the lack of reading or writing skills from the families or their limited understanding of Spanish. As we are a bilingual country, this is a very frequent situation. The use of tablets involved a whole new set of challenges by themselves. Connectivity and electricity supply are not guaranteed in rural areas, and even in urban areas, it depends highly on weather conditions. The use of standard device, the tablets, was certainly valuable, but we had some issues with them. In most areas, it is normal here to receive visitors outdoors, maybe in a garden or a porch, and the screen wasn't very adjusted to that situation. The battery didn't last during a full field workday. And finally, the survey, I'm sorry. And finally, the survey took place in isolated rural communities. And we would have benefited from an internal GPS for monitoring the quality of the survey. The software and the system characteristic also prevented its flexibility. It was complicated to replace devices due to malfunctioning or damage, and transferring the cases from the old one to the new one. We struggled a lot with it. It wasn't easy to correct mistakes done by maybe the interviewer, but also by the youth interviewed. And the backup of the system required really stable internet connection, and otherwise it takes really, really long time to be updated. And this was a challenge with our interviewers. And of course, not only youth had limited experience with tablets, interviewers faced extra difficulties due to their lack of skills, or maybe sometimes just lack of confidence working with it. Here you can have an idea of how our interviews took place. Just outdoors and night activity also. Regarding analysis and reporting, all the work done for reporting and analysis during the PISA-D in-school stage was really helpful, as well as the training in Paris for the lead analysts. It was a huge learning experience for our team, and it was quite useful for us to carry out the out-of-school reporting. But there are some issues that made these two strands quite different. PISA-D out of school used different sampling strategy, and that wasn't easy to explain and translate to broader audiences. And moreover, they affected the international comparability of out-of-school results. The number of assessed youth was lower, so it wasn't possible to disaggregate data for all variables at a level we would have liked to. So some of the groups we wanted to analyze were just too small. And the questionnaires were clearly not as tested and fine-tuned as the in-school ones. And it was a new context, so some questions regarding employment, for example, were not gathered in depth. The main findings show us that out-of-school youth show less competences than in-school kids. And what is more, the more years in school, the better the performance. In other words, school is relevant for youth to acquire skills and develop competences. As results presented by our in-school assessment already, the use of mother tongue during primary school is a significant factor affecting performance. Guarani speakers, adolescents do not have the same opportunity as Spanish-speaking ones. Regarding obstacles to continue attending schools, the main ones are related to poverty, as Nadia and my colleagues before already expressed. Most of them are related to socioeconomic circumstances of the families. Most of the students that abandon school are currently working in unqualified jobs. As well, their parents reach low level of education. Themselves, 86% of parents of dropout youth reach 6th grade, ISCED 1 or below. Youth and their families reported that some of the requirements for them to go back to school would be the distance. The school should be closer to their households and more accessible. The instruction offered should be related to their livelihoods in their communities as well as their interests. As well, they reported that learning could be done at students' own pace, and they would receive extra support to improve their reading skills. The results of this out-of-school study gave us insight about areas of intervention and policies and programs to keep youth at school and for institutions to leave no one behind. If you would like to know more about specific results, I am afraid you have to wait until next week formal presentation of our national report, and that will be virtual too, so you can join us next week on the 9th. Here you can see one of many sweet moments we had during the main survey. Our interviewer is taking care of the baby while the adolescent mom is taking the test. And finally, as a conclusion, we have to say that we are proud to have contributed not only to a national report on the out-of-school youth and in our country, but also, as well as the other 4 countries, to testing and improving this international innovative assessment. PISA-D out-of-school assessment is very relevant to know to know who the out-of-school youth are and to understand their dropout reasons. And of course, to design strategies to prevent school abandonment and to mitigate its effects in youth facing the situation. Following up with PISA-D Strand C, new strategies must be explored to find ways to reduce in-country costs and to, at the same time, guarantee that we are reaching most of the kids. Only then PISA-D out of school will be really feasible for periodic assessments to monitor our progress. Thanks for your attention. For further information, you can contact us at the Ministry of Education webpage or directly to the email you can see on the slide.
Thank you, Veronica, for your excellent presentation. And Veronica is one of the country leads who worked for this project from the beginning until the end. And it's also a pleasure for us to get to this point together. But also, as Veronica nicely highlighted, these countries not only benefiting from this initiative, but also contributed to enhance the whole PISA, and many countries, including OECD countries, are benefiting from the improved and enhanced PISA in the future. So thank you very much for that contribution. Et donc maintenant, j'ai le plaisir de vous présenter Massar Diop de Sénégal, de INEA, de l'Institut d'évaluation. Massar, s'il vous plaît.
Voilà, donc je vais vous faire la présentation de la participation du Sénégal au PISA-D volet C. Le plan de la présentation s'intitule comme tel. D'abord, nous allons parler des éléments de contexte, c'est-à-dire pourquoi le Sénégal a participé au PISA-D. Nous aborderons avec vous les objectifs et les enjeux de la participation au volet C du PISA. Nous aborderons aussi le processus de la mise en œuvre. Nous parlerons des défis et des initiatives dans l'organisation. Il y aura aussi un point sur l'analyse des données qui nous mène jusqu'aux principales conclusions. Et enfin, il y a les leçons apprises, évidemment, que nous avons retenues. Voilà, donc j'étais sur le contexte. Autrement dit, pourquoi, évidemment, le Sénégal s'est inscrit dans la logique d'une participation au PISA. Je crois qu'il y a le contexte international avec le programme 2030 des Nations Unies et le cadre d'action pour le développement durable. Le Sénégal, donc, qui s'est inscrit, évidemment, dans ce programme-là, a voulu, évidemment, avoir des indicateurs qui lui permettent d'inscrire ou bien d'aligner son système éducatif aux normes internationales. Sur le plan continental aussi, nous avons les réformes, évidemment, de l'Union économique monétaire ouest-africaine. C'est vrai que quand nous allons vers une perspective économique, on a besoin d'avoir, évidemment, des sujets, des citoyens qui peuvent se mouvoir facilement, évidemment, dans ce nouvel univers. Il y a l'agenda aussi 2063 de l'Union africaine et la stratégie continentale de l'éducation. Alors, en 2025, là aussi, évidemment, le Sénégal qui a ratifié, évidemment, cette Union africaine aussi a besoin, effectivement, alors d'avoir des indicateurs lui permettant d'être dans la mouvance. Et au niveau national, nous avons le Sénégal émergent et l'acte 3 de la décentralisation. Le plan Sénégal émergent est un programme interne national et qui permet de revoir un peu la perspective du développement autrement. Et ça, c'est depuis 2012. Donc, cette nouvelle orientation alors, pousse aussi le Sénégal, encore une fois de plus, à aligner alors, son système éducatif aux normes internationales. Il y a l'acte 3 de la décentralisation, il y a les assises de l'éducation et de la formation. Les assises, ce sont les recommandations des experts, des pédagogues, des praticiens de terrain. Tout cela, évidemment, on réfléchit pour dire que nécessairement notre système, de manière générale, qu'il s'agit du système éducatif, tout comme de la gestion de l'informel, a besoin d'une nouvelle orientation. Et enfin, il y a le nouveau curriculum d'éducation de base, autrement dit, un nouveau programme qui est installé au niveau des écoles. Et ce nouveau programme a besoin d'une orientation vers de nouvelles perspectives. Donc, autant de questions, évidemment, qui interpellent le Sénégal et qui le poussent, évidemment, à participer à des évaluations internationales. Quels sont les objectifs et les enjeux? On veut promouvoir des politiques d'insertion sociale plus inclusives envers la jeunesse. Autrement dit, je crois que, comme certains l'ont dit, il ne faut pas laisser une certaine tranche de la population en rade. Ce n'est pas seulement les bénéficiaires de l'école, du système formel, qui doivent être gérés. Il faut pouvoir gérer l'ensemble des enfants pour leur trouver, évidemment, un avenir meilleur. Faire de l'école pour tous une réalité en développant des idées sur la façon d'aider les élèves au Sénégal. Je crois que là aussi, je crois que c'est une nouvelle perspective qui s'ouvre à ce niveau-là pour permettre à ceux-là qui ont très tôt quitté l'école ou qui n'ont pas fréquenté l'école d'avoir des possibilités d'augmenter un peu leur background pour engager un peu l'avenir. comprendre les niveaux d'apprentissage des jeunes non scolarisés et les obstacles à la scolarisation qui existent dans le pays. Et là aussi, ça a été un besoin, évidemment, au niveau du système de manière générale, pour voir ceux-là qui ne sont pas à l'école, quels sont les obstacles, pourquoi ils n'ont pas été à l'école. Et qu'est-ce qui fait effectivement globalement qu'ils ne veulent pas évidemment continuer un peu leur cursus scolaire. Quelles sont les entraves? Est-ce que c'est les parents? Est-ce que c'est les moyens? Est-ce que c'est le système globalement alors qu'il ne leur permet pas de développer? Et enfin, on a voulu renforcer les capacités évidemment de ceux-là qui ont en charge l'évaluation, alors pour leur permettre d'avoir la main quand il s'agit de faire des évaluations à grande échelle. Donc voilà en fait les objectifs et les enjeux de notre participation. Quel est le processus que nous avons mis en œuvre? Le départ, ça a été une analyse des besoins et des capacités. Je crois que pour un pays africain, sud-sahélien qui n'a jamais participé à des évaluations d'une si grande envergure, il fallait quand même tester un peu leur capacité pour voir est-ce que, alors, ils ont les moyens alors, pour faire le travail qu'il faut. Et à ce niveau-là, l'OCDE avait engagé une consultante qui était avec nous et qui nous a permis de voir et de mettre les sièges pour pouvoir faire l'évaluation. Nous sommes partis aussi d'un plan de renforcement de capacité pour renforcer un peu la capacité des gestionnaires, ceux-là qui sont appelés à gérer le système de manière générale, alors, et surtout à conduire l'évaluation, leur permettre un peu d'avoir la main et de comprendre un peu évidemment comment les choses doivent se faire. Le lancement officiel a été fait par le ministre de l'Éducation nationale, ça c'était en janvier 2015. Après cela, on est passé à la réception des brochures, analyser les items et faire des adaptations. Ça a été un travail de feedback entre l'OCDE et l'INEAD pour recevoir les items, les analyser, les adapter par rapport à nos réalités culturelles. Ensuite, évidemment, les retourner pour que cela ne dérange personne. Pour l'échantillon, on a eu 2000 jeunes de 15 à 16 ans qui ont été recensés à travers ce qu'on appelle les districts de recensement. Alors, ceci aussi a été facilité par le travail de ce qu'on appelle l'ANSD. Parce que l'ANSD au Sénégal fait le recensement, fait ce qu'on appelle les districts, les zones de recensement. On s'est appuyé évidemment sur ce recensement-là, sur les zones-là, pour échantillonner 2000 jeunes, évidemment, de 15 à 16 ans. À ce niveau-là, je voulais seulement préciser que on n'a pas pris en compte dans notre évaluation les enfants qui sont dans le système. Autrement dit, les enfants qui ont 15-16 ans et qui n'ont pas encore dépassé la 6e année. Malheureusement, parce que l'évaluation a été faite pendant les vacances. Quand l'évaluation a été faite pendant les vacances, les écoles étaient fermées. Alors, on a dû compter que sur les élèves, sur les enfants qui étaient hors du système, autrement dit, qui n'étaient pas, évidemment, au CM2 malgré leur âge. Donc, il y a eu une préparation de la plateforme, alors, et les tablettes pour recevoir les items. On a sélectionné et formé les enquêteurs parce qu'il fallait un profilage pour les enquêteurs. Ceci a été fait. Alors, on a fait la formation pour leur permettre d'aller librement sur le terrain. Pour cela, il y a eu un essai sur le terrain, ce qu'on appelle le test pilote. On a analysé les résultats et on a stabilisé les items avant de passer à l'enquête principale. Pour l'enquête principale aussi, il y a eu une formation. Les collègues ont été envoyés partout sur le territoire sénégalais, dans tous les coins, pour faire la collecte. Quand ils sont revenus, on a fait le codage et on a fait le saisie pour envoyer la base, le traitement et le nettoiement des données. Donc voilà en fait le processus de la mise en œuvre. Pour les défis et les initiatives dans l'organisation, la maîtrise de l'informatique pour poster et recueillir les items et les modules de formation. Là aussi, véritablement, ça a été un défi majeur, évidemment, que nous sommes parvenus à relever. Mais il se trouve que aussi les défis et les difficultés que nous avons à ce niveau-là, c'est surtout les testeurs que nous avons envoyés au niveau du terrain. Parce que là, la connexion n'est pas partout, l'électricité aussi n'est pas partout. Souvent, on a eu énormément de difficultés. Alors, pour certains qui se déplaçaient d'un village à un autre, ne serait-ce que pour avoir de l'électricité et de la connexion, pour pouvoir envoyer alors, les données à temps réel. Les moyens additionnels, en plus de l'apport de la Banque mondiale, on l'a dit, je crois que le docteur, dans son introduction en a parlé. Quand il s'agit des moyens, les moyens étaient un peu colossaux, surtout pour les pays en voie de développement. Il a fallu compter sur l'apport de la Banque mondiale et de l'AFD, mais il y a des moyens que le Sénégal lui-même devait prendre en charge, notamment les déplacements, les véhicules et le salaire de ses enseignants et tout cela. Heureusement, évidemment, que ça a été géré par le budget national. La disponibilité de moyens logistiques pour effectuer les déplacements, là aussi, ça a été un défi. Alors, donc, il fallait beaucoup de véhicules pour suivre les collègues sur le terrain, les testeurs, alors pour pouvoir encadrer davantage leur travail. Il fallait aussi concilier le travail de PISA et d'autres travaux que nous sommes en train de faire, parce qu'on a d'autres évaluations, que ce soit des évaluations internes, que des évaluations sous-régionales, qu'il fallait gérer en même temps que le PISA. Donc, ça a été alors des interpellations sur plusieurs fronts. Le repérage des DER et la disponibilité aléatoire des cibles, là aussi, ça a été une difficulté, parce que quand vous allez sur le terrain, vous pouvez cibler un jeune, mais malheureusement, il se peut qu'il ne soit disponible. Il ne peut pas être disponible. Soit il est dans les champs, ou bien il a voyagé, il va falloir peut-être attendre, ou bien appeler au téléphone pour avoir un rendez-vous avec lui. Donc, c'était des va-et-vient à n'en plus finir, évidemment, pour avoir l'information auprès de cette cible-là. La relation avec les communautés, alors qu'il fallait véritablement embellir, parce que si les communautés ne vous acceptent pas, ils pensent que si vous venez pour faire des enquêtes, c'est pour prélever des impôts. Alors, ils ont souvent cette peur-là. Alors, parfois, ils ne donnent pas l'information comme cela se doit. Donc, il fallait user de stratégies, de plusieurs stratégies, impliquer beaucoup de personnes qui sont tout à fait influentes au niveau du milieu, pour pouvoir évidemment avoir l'information qui était attendue. Donc, c'était un travail véritablement de collaboration. De l'analyse des données au rapportage. Donc, la production du rapport du Sénégal sur sa participation a suivi plusieurs étapes. Du 11 mai au 20 juillet 2018, on a convoqué ce qu'on appelle les lead analystes, qui étaient regroupés au siège de l'OCDE à Paris pour l'analyse et la rédaction du rapport du strand A et B. Au retour, il y a eu une préparation du lancement du rapport national sur l'évaluation en milieu scolaire. C'était le volet A et le volet B qu'on a fait le 11 décembre 2018 à la sphère ministérielle de Diamniadio. Donc là où, évidemment, où se retrouvent beaucoup de ministères au Sénégal. On a analysé ces données après pour le strand C. Il y a eu la préparation du rapport national qui a été actualisé et on a intégré l'analyse des données du volet C. Donc, nous, au Sénégal, on a opté pour un rapport intégré. Le rapport de strand A et B, on y a ajouté, évidemment, les éléments du strand C pour que ça soit un rapport unique. Nous sommes allés maintenant vers l'impression de ces rapports et des flyers qu'on va distribuer à la population. Et nous préparons le lancement, évidemment, au courant de ce mois de décembre. En principe, on devait le faire depuis le 3, mais c'est reporté, évidemment, à une nouvelle date. Je crois que pour le 16. Les résultats de la participation. Aucun jeune scolarisé n'a obtenu le score moyen. Notamment ça, on l'a constaté, qu'aucun de nos jeunes n'a obtenu, évidemment, le score moyen. D'ailleurs, tous les jeunes sénégalais sont au niveau 1. Nous nous sommes retrouvés, évidemment, au niveau 1. Que ce soit niveau 1A, niveau 1B, et même en dessous de niveau 1C. Alors, donc ça a été, évidemment, une observation. Il n'y a pas eu de différence majeure entre le score des filles et les garçons. On s'est rendu compte que la différence est infime. Même si ça tend un peu vers les filles, mais quand même, ça a été presque la même chose. Les élèves scolarisés ne dépassent pas les jeunes non scolarisés qu'avec un score de moins d'1 an de scolarité. On a pu comparer ceux qui ne sont jamais à l'école et ceux qui ont quitté même l'école à mi-parcours. Autrement dit, il y a ceux qui ne sont jamais scolarisés qui représentent 29%, mais ceux qui ont quitté l'école en début de primaire, 13% et 41% qui ont quitté avant le CM2. Alors, tous ces enfants-là, on a vu que leur score était plus ou moins approché. Alors, il y a un rapprochement de leur performance. Alors, ce qui nous fait dire que, évidemment, alors, le coût, évidemment, la valeur ajoutée de la scolarisation n'a pas été proportionnée aux différences de performance entre, évidemment, les différentes couches sociales que nous avons. L'autre aspect que nous avons observé aussi, c'est que les principales barrières à la scolarisation sont d'ordre financier, alors, et géographique. soit c'est un problème de moyens pour lesquels les élèves ont quitté l'école, ou bien il y a une distance, autrement dit, les écoles sont un peu éloignées. On s'est rendu compte aussi que 30% des jeunes interrogés ne sont jamais inscrits à l'école. Donc, vous voyez que cela interpelle encore l'État. 30% de jeunes qui ne sont jamais allés à l'école et qui font partie de la base. Donc, ça montre qu'il y a lieu encore de mettre l'accent sur la scolarisation. On s'est rendu compte que les non scolarisés sont pour la plupart dans le quintet le plus bas de l'indice socio-économique du PISA. Ce qui veut dire que donc, plus on va à l'école, ceux qui vont à l'école ont des faveurs par rapport à l'indice socio-économique. Ceux qui ont eu des performances beaucoup plus faibles, et surtout les non scolarisés, évidemment, ont des indices socio-économiques très faibles par rapport à l'indice du PISA. Les non scolarisés sont plus susceptibles à une santé fragile et à une insatisfaction à la vie. Là aussi, ça a été une observation. Donc, le fait d'aller à l'école, ça permet un peu de rehausser un peu la santé, mais aussi la satisfaction par rapport à la vie. Quelles sont les leçons que nous avons apprises globalement? Que nous devons poursuivre la création des collèges de proximité et le renforcement en équipement pour éviter la déperdition scolaire. Parce qu'on s'est rendu compte que les élèves ont quitté parce que les écoles sont éloignées. Nous devons développer des offres alternatives plus en phase avec les aspirations des jeunes en diversifiant les filières techniques. Alors, donc, ces enfants-là qui vont à l'école ont besoin aussi d'avoir des débouchés. Donc, il faut que l'apprentissage leur permette un peu d'aller vers évidemment des emplois. Développer des cours d'alphabétisation fonctionnelle pour les jeunes qui sont dans l'apprentissage des métiers. Donc, développer aussi des stratégies qui permettent à ceux-là qui ont quitté l'école aussi d'avoir des métiers. Pas plus tard qu'hier, à la télévision, j'ai entendu un inspecteur de l'éducation dire qu'ils ont recensé plus de 400 et quelques enfants qui n'ont jamais été à l'école pour leur trouver évidemment des classes d'alphabétisation au niveau de leur circonscription. Donc, j'estime que c'est déjà un pas, alors qui leur permet évidemment d'enrôler tous ces enfants-là qui ont besoin d'un minimum d'instruction pour faire face un peu à leur interpellation quotidienne, autrement dit à leur métier. Continuer à promouvoir l'équité, alors l'équité entre les garçons et les filles et entre l'ensemble des segments de la population pour vaincre davantage la vulnérabilité, mais aussi renforcer la communication avec les acteurs de l'école, de la famille autour de l'apprentissage et de l'instruction. Voilà en gros, évidemment, les points sur lesquels, évidemment, le Sénégal s'était inscrit. Nous vous remercions.
Merci Massar pour une excellente présentation et je sais que le Sénégal organise le lancement national dans 2 semaines et je serai honorée d'y assister encore une fois, mais cette fois-ci virtuellement. Okay, so let's start the Q&A and discussion session. And for this session, I'm pleased also to invite Michael Ward, who is the mastermind of all these long years of development and implementation of this initiative, and could also provide complementary comments and answers to the questions asked. So let me pick up some of the questions already asked through the chat box. First, this is a question to Sylvia of the UIS. For the SDG 4 monitoring, what about the citizen-led assessment? For example, PAL network. Are you also taking these into account for triangulation of out-of-school children learning levels?
Yes, and thank you for this question. We're actually having 2 issues in the work with the, or 2 aspects to work with the PAL network. We have worked the first one that is trying to see how much the test in itself is aligned to the definition of minimum proficiency levels that are reflected in the scale we use for the international reporting, because we have very concrete definitions and we need to be sure that the assessment is actually considering those definitions. So we have run already a first alignment and seen that this is able to actually to be used in the case of a PAL network. So we're really considering that. So we have run the first technical issue. The second issue has to do with the use of data. We publish the data and we use the data as long as the governments are actually endorsing the result of the the results of the PAL network, because this is actually is one of the requirements that the governments are validating the publication. We certainly use this as a source for our analysis. For the sake of reporting, we have to actually to comply with these two aspects. So thank you, and over to you.
Good, thank you, Sylvia, for clarification. Then we received another question for Vilma. When we saw the results of Honduras, it looked puzzling for some countries. How do you explain the higher performance of out of school in reading and in math, if the understanding of the participant is correct? Could you clarify the performance difference and how you explain?
Okay, the performance in math and in reading, we can see that there is a higher level in the out of school students, but that doesn't mean that the in school youth have a better performance. No, this is because there is the youth that are out school they have dropped the school in grades greater than 7th grade, so that they are more prepared than the ones that are in schools in grades less than 7th grade. That's why. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's important to consider this context, but also we need to have a detailed level of reading of the results. And for example, in terms of the reading performance in school, students outperform out of school youth, and you need to look into the different subjects and different group of out of school youth for that. We received also a question about the test logistics. So maybe participating countries, or like Nadia or Veronica, or maybe OECD team, Michael, could respond to that. One question about the logistic is, are the tests mainly applied at home, or is it possible to gather these out of school adolescents and use in the same place in order to apply the test collectively? I wonder if one of the participating country leads want to respond to the test operation.
Judy, can I
yes, please,
give
Edgar?
an answer? Yes.
Yes, please.
In the case of Guatemala, we use two kinds of samples. The sample, the representative sample is a household survey, and we need to 1,200 cases, and we visit almost 1,900, more than 2,000 house families, and we use 600 cases for samples of limited representative. In the case and the representative sample were interviewed with young people at home, but in the sample of limited representatives, we take the records of educational system and identify the student with 15 years old in 6th grade or less, and visit the schools. This is the form with we make the interviews.
Great, thank you very much for sharing the experience of Guatemala. Is there anybody else who wants to share about the approach to reach out of school youth?
Yes, so we had a really big sample. We planned to visit 30,000 households, but we actually visited 25,000. And but we also used the same strategy than Guatemala did, and interviewed around 200 kids at school. selected from the administrative reports from the Ministry of Education. But regarding the question, there was a strategy that we could have chosen, but we didn't. We could have gathered them, for example, in a community center or in a church or in a gathering spot in the community, and invite them. But we needed a lot of tablets and interviewers at the same time doing these interviews, and it wasn't, we were not really sure it was going to work, but it was an interesting alternative for, communities that really gather around community centers or youth centers or any other kind of municipal services. We chose not to do it, especially because we were mainly focused in rural areas and distances were really big, and we went with other strategies. And there's a second question that asked about refuses, and I just want to say that before I finish.
Yes, that was anyway the second question. Please go ahead.
We have really few refuses at home, but there were we have like three kind of. One of them were really close communities from Mennonites. I'm not sure if you know, they were like really close religious communities, and they wouldn't allow our interviewers to get in, or they would do the screener and then send us out. And the other group was children that were living with a partner, that they were underage, and they would refuse, they would deny that they were younger. So it was some kind of refusal. And finally, we had really few cases, but kids that were working in a house, living there, but they were domestic employees, and then the owner of the house wouldn't allow them to continue with assessment. These were the kind of refusal we got, but they were really a few, just a few.
Yuri, I can just maybe give an overview. I mean, Veronica has just told us she had to go to almost 25,000 households to get about 1,500 completed cases. Guatemala had to go to more than 20,000 households to get 1,200 completed cases. Honduras, almost 20,000 households to get 1,200 cases. Panama, more than 17,000 households visited to get 1,000 cases. And Senegal, 8,000 households to get 2,000 completed cases. So that's the kind of level of effort that was involved. More than 90,000 households visited to get 7,500 completed cases.
Thanks, Michael. Then related to this question, I see a question asking about the methodology. And if we were to redo the PISA-D out of school component again, would you sample only the out of school 14 to 16 years old, or all the young people of 14 to 6-year-old at the household level? There are many implications of the sampling if we want to redo or continue. Do you have any reflection on that, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a question that was asked right at the beginning. I think we were right to do it the way we did. We were piloting this to see how it would work, and we were comparing the in-school with the out-of-school. So if we're to do it again, and really this is what we're going to be discussing in the final session today, we are going to be looking at how we can either link this approach to a household survey or go even further and integrate the PISA-D assessment with a household survey. And in that option, which we hopefully will be doing next, we would be sampling all the 14 to 16-year-olds in the population, including those who are in school, those who are sort of on the sort of edges of school attendance, and those who are truly out of school. So we will do that next. and that will be a very, very interesting exercise for us. And that's what we'll be discussing in the final session today.
Good, thank you. Then I pick up the final question, which will be actually a very good bridge to the next session. Margaret of the World Bank asked, especially to participating countries, do you plan to implement another out-of-school assessment of youth in the future, either as part of PISA or through another initiative? I would like to ask one or two countries if you have any thinking about the future implementation of out-of-school youth survey. Or this could be also the question to be answered through the next sessions or next presentation of the way forward. So I'd like to invite Michael to introduce the points.
Thanks. Thank you, Yuri. So when it comes to the next steps with the PISA-D out-of-school assessment, which I think Margaret was really sort of hinting at, we're looking at three options for taking this forward. So the first option is a standalone international option as part of a future PISA cycle. So a country doing PISA could take up the out-of-school assessment just as we've done it in PISA for development, and implement it side by side or maybe at a staggered time as they implement the PISA assessment. Now, a variation on this first option, which we're calling a second option, is to do this international option as part of a future PISA cycle, but link it to a household survey. And the reason that you might want to link to a household survey is to reduce the really quite considerable costs of identifying and locating out-of-school youth to act as the respondents. So these are sort of the first two options that we're taking forward. And then who might be interested in these kinds of options? Well, I think given the experience of the countries, and I think people, will have listened to the presentations from the countries, it's a very significant level of effort involved to do an out-of-school assessment side by side with an in-school assessment, even if you are linking to and piggybacking on a household survey. So we are suggesting that the potential countries who might want to take this forward within a PISA cycle would be those who are experienced PISA participants, but still have a low coverage index when it comes to the coverage of their secondary school systems. So these are the countries that we are already talking to, many of them, and suggesting that in a future PISA cycle, these countries might want to consider taking the out-of-school assessment as an international option. And this will be available to countries who are participating in PISA 2025. Then the third option, and really this is the segue, if you like, to our final session today. The third option for taking this all forward is to design a shorter test. So building on the instrument we've used in PISA development out of school assessment, but to develop out of this a shorter test. We think around about 15 to 20 minutes. We're still working on this. We should have it ready as an instrument by January or February. And this instrument wouldn't just link with a household survey, but could be integrated with it and could be implemented as part of a household survey. And this could be linked to a future PISA cycle. These results could be compared with the PISA results in terms of the cycle, but it also could be a completely separate study. And this is a very exciting option and would very much address the earlier point that's already been raised about if we could do it again, would we test all of the 14 to 16-year-olds in a population rather than just looking for the out of school? And this would definitely be a way of doing that. So this is our segue from the PISA for development experience that we've just been looking at into this very exciting work program that we're going to discuss in the next session measuring learning through the life cycle in multi-topic household surveys. Thank you, Yuri.
Thank you very much, Michael. So with this, we close this very rich session of the exchange of experiences and a question and answer. And now I'd like to hand over to Sylvia for the next session. Sylvia, please.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you. It's really very exciting to reach this point of today and actually look at the way forward we have been discussing. So we're going to have a session on actually measuring learning through the life cycle that is all about SDG 4 that we have seen during the presentation. And I would like to, before introducing the panel, we have a really rich set of colleagues that are going to talk about different aspects. I would like to actually to update a little bit what is the spirit of collaboration that has been happening before the COVID, but now seems to be kind of more adequate to actually to place, because there are a kind of a brutal need of data to inform some of the consequence of COVID and the impact. So we have been working the UNESCO, the UIS as part of UNESCO, UNICEF, the OECD, the World Bank, and other stakeholders, but we are the main ones that who have been discussing how to pair two sources of information that are very rich. On one way, the household service that collect data and community on households, and we have factors that are driven internally in the household that are conditioning in different aspects, the life and the social status of families and individuals. And on the other hand, the learning assessment and different tools that has been developed through time, how we can actually connect this and try to address issues that are happening. We have still a lot of data gaps in the reporting and for our understanding and for advice policy making. We have issues that are related to better understanding, because we need to understand some of the other factors that are conditioning learning and the skills of the population. And at the same time, there are cost issues. And so far, these two sources of information, learning assessment and skills and households service, has been treated in a different way. We have actually asked ourselves what we can do to try to bridge these two very rich sources of information and take advantage of instruments and tools that have been already developed and that could be used to different moments of the life cycle. We're going to actually, we have this collaboration that has been ongoing since last year, and actually has gotten a first stop in February of this year, that just right before the outbreak of COVID. And we are going to actually be discussing and hearing from the colleagues about these different aspects. We're going to have Joao Pedro from the World Bank. We're going to have Claudia Capa and Manuela Cardoso from UNICEF. Dirk Harstedt from the IEA, that is going to talk about also their measurement and the prospect that could be about the instrument from IEA on household service. And we're going to hear from Michael Ward from OECD, from Nicholas Jonas from the Institute of Lifelong Learning as well, and from Jero Carleto from the World Bank, that is actually running the LSMS program for quite a while and is going to be sharing. So we're going to have this session. We're going to hear the speakers, and we're going to actually to be looking at the Q&As in the chat. So please feel free to start writing immediately and actually ask your questions. And please send the questions. We're going to be hearing first from Joao Pedro. So Joao Pedro, over to you, and thank you so much for being with us. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can see me and hear me. So I would like to start by thanking the organizers for the opportunity and complimenting the countries for the great effort in setting this up. I think this is it's a critical initiative, and I think the results they speak for themselves in terms of the importance of actually complementing our understanding of the SDGs and precisely with the out-of-school population, right? Basically, I think, you know, as we've been hearing Michael and Sylvia, I think, you know, we want to start by the problem that we are trying to tackle, right? And here there's a set of issues that have been, I think, touched upon in today's session, which we believe are of critical importance for us to address going forward, right? So I think the first is definitely the fact that there isn't sufficient learning assessment data and timely learning assessment data in low and middle income countries, right? I think that especially from a life cycle perspective, right? I think the PISA program has made remarkable progress and has really shifted the conversation in many countries, and today has a significant share of countries, but it's still, there are regions in which are significantly underrepresented, such as Africa and South Asia, and those are the regions of the world in which the learning challenges, the learning crises are the most severe. And as Sylvia mentioned, COVID has only aggravated this situation, right? We also have this very fragmented space of data collection on learning, right? With multiple programs which happen at different points in time and make it harder or bring some challenges from an analytical perspective, right? I think that we know that basically our ability to influence policy is going to be directly linked with our ability to explain the variability, the variance of our learning results or test score results. And one dimension that we feel that I think is still underrepresented is precisely what happens at the household, right? So parental background, other siblings, the assets of the household. Since we know that even across schools, 70% of the variance in learning are within schools, right? So the school effect doesn't explain everything that is happening, right? So we need to enrich our understanding, and for that, I think bringing the better data from the household and household composition and the environment in which this kid is growing can be instrumental to improve our understanding and then of course the policy designs. There's also, I think, much to be done in terms to increase the take-up of statistical agencies on this process and potentially the ownership and sustainability of these efforts, broadening the conversation beyond the Ministry of Education, but also bringing these other actors and creating, what we call population level statistics, right? Now, it is important to also acknowledge, right, that there are some successful experiences in this space, and I think the mix at UNICEF is the main exception, right, in which it's a program that has maybe two out of those modules, right, the CDI, which we'll hear later today, and the foundational learning that Manuel Cardoso will also talk. Claudia and Emmanuel will be briefing us on that. But the point is that we do want to have this more kind of broader life cycle perspective that also reflects the spirit of the SDG that goes from early childhood development all the way to adult with the SDG 4.6 and brings this this continuum of learning with the very special caveat that in this conversation we are not imagining or aspiring or thinking that we're going to be developing a vertically integrated scale of learning, right? That's not the objective of the exercise. And another very important point is that we don't see this as a replacement of the learning assessments, right? This effort that we're talking about will be something that, as Michael mentioned, there'll be a short instrument, right, that will be able to give better information about one particular aspect of learning, which is, what share of the population is above or below this minimum proficiency level as defined by the SDGs, right? But it's not going to replace in any way the richness that programs such as PEARLS and PISA, right, really bring, which provide us with a much richer set of information, right? But potentially it can complement and it can be a first step, especially for countries that don't yet have those programs, and it can be an off-cycle strategy as well, right? which again, as mentioned during the COVID pandemic, it's even more important. So what have we done to date? Basically, as Sylvia mentioned, we've had this first workshop, and it really, I think it was extremely positive in the sense that I think we all left with a sense that it made a made a lot of sense for us to work together and try to build this at least this effort, this pilot, to see what can we learn in terms of trying to integrate these things into a broader household survey framework. We have basically proposed this effort in the context of the SDG Technical Cooperation Group, and we hope that this activity will be endorsed in that context. And we have been able to even, I think, bring some agencies that were not as involved in the February workshop, such as IEA, and Dirk will talk to us a bit later about the possibility of a LANA short module, and of course colleagues from UIL that basically co-lead the SDG 4.6, the adult education aspect. I think our next steps are really to identify these items, such as the ones that Michael mentioned, right, or the short modules that could be plugged into the surveys. We want to consolidate protocols to facilitate the training and the capacity building of the numerators, and that we plan to pilot. We want to explore the possibility of doing some of these, if not all of these modules, both on a face-to-face contact setting as well as on a phone, given that COVID has brought this additional challenge, right? And definitely move to a pilot of this integrated approach. I think today we have a very exciting lineup of colleagues who will talk in depth about each one of these short modules or approaches that we are contemplating, and we'll be closing with Jero from the World Bank, who will give us kind of a way forward. And before we go to that, I also want to share the importance of also thinking about agile ways to collect data, not just about learning and cognitive data, but also learning data about engagement and take up of educational policies and programs, right? And this is something that COVID has made it abundantly clear, and we in the World Bank have been experimenting together, of course, with Jero's LSMS data group, as well as the poverty practice. And this is just an illustration of the type of insights that we can get by using phone surveys and asking very basic questions. So, it'll be in terms of how remote learning and how the engagement with the educational system and with learning has continued during the school closures and after the pandemic began. And here we have insights from both Latin American countries in the light green and the light blue sub-Saharan African countries, right? We have about 29 countries in which we've ran this in a comparable fashion. And we can see the drastic differences of the share of kids that live in households that have continued to be engaged with the educational system, right? In Latin America, we have 92% of kids living in households in which learning has, in some way, shape, or form, continued, right? While in sub-Saharan Africa, the number is significantly lower, 47%. Moreover, the variance, the regional across-country inequality is also striking, right? While the range in Latin America goes from 80% to 97%, in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, this range explodes from 86%, as the case in the country with the best kind of engagement post-pandemic, to 17% in the country that has the worst, right? So, inequalities between countries are likely to increase due to this shock. And here we have some initial evidence on how, families and households are basically being able to cope with this shock, and how different it is across countries, even within a particular region, right? But that's not the whole message, the whole story, right? This additional pieces of evidence are also interesting because on the left panel, what we see is precisely how this inequality is going to play within the households, right? So what we have here is both regions, Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa, and each one of these bars now, we're basically breaking down the regional average by the level of highest education of an adult in the household. So while in households in which they have adults with tertiary education, 94% of the kids are continue to be engaged in some educational activity. In households with no education, with no adult with education, this number goes down to 67% in the case of Latin America as an average, right, for all these countries. And of course in Africa the situation is more dire, right? As we have seen it goes from 33% to 59%, and basically we can see that the best performing households, if you will, in Africa are still worse than the worst performing households in Latin America, right? Households with tertiary education, their engagement is still lower than the households with no adult education, right? So the inequalities both across countries and within countries are likely to explode due to this pandemic, as many of us have been saying, right, in the past months. And we need to be ready for that. And we need to be able to rapidly assess these kids once schools, or once there is some sense of normality, or there's some possibility to do so, even if through phones. And of course, the kinds of strategies and modalities of remote learning, they are playing out in very different ways, right? While in Africa, basically, in addition to most kids having access to nothing, when they do have access to something, right, this tends to be a single technology, right? Either papers, tutors, radios, and TVs. So the notion of multimodality and complementarity across these technologies, when you think about the remote learning strategy or the mitigation strategy for the countries, are really not there in Africa, right? Basically the multimodality is being used as a way to increase outreach and not so much to enrich the learning experience. While when we look at Latin America, what we do see is really this multimodal approach, right? That households are actually experiencing not just a single mode of remote learning, but multiple, right? Such as paper, mobile, and tutor, or paper, mobile meaning internet, TV or tutor, paper or tutor, paper and TV, paper, TV and tutor. And so this multimodality really seems to be playing in Latin America in a very different way than it is playing in Africa. And a couple of other highlights of this is that paper is present in virtually all options, right? The most relevant options, there's always paper. And second, tutors are playing a significant role, right, in these strategies. So the human component has not gone away in Latin America, right? So families are still relying on some kind of human support, human interaction. This tutor can be a private tutor. It can be the teacher that is connected to these kids through WhatsApp and through other technologies, but there is still that human remote tutoring component, which I think it's a very important message. So I'll stop it here and pass it to Sylvia. And thank you very much, and looking forward to the discussion and listening to the colleagues.
Thank you so much, Pedro. Great presentation. And we invite Claudia. Claudia, please, is going to be sharing some thoughts about measuring in early childhood with us. Over to you, Claudia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Silva, for giving me a chance to present the work that has been done by UNICEF and partners over the last few years to develop a measure that is intended to capture early child development outcomes. Let me start by giving you a sense of what this measure is about. As mentioned by João Pedro, this is an instrument that has been developed and tested with a specific measurement purpose in mind. And the purpose was to have a measure that can be used in population level data collection efforts. with the idea of having a short and simple questionnaire that can be integrated into ongoing data collection efforts that requires very minimal time of administration, but also does not require specialized interviewers, but can be really administered by generic interviewers as part of surveys that cover many different topics. We know that the measurement of early childhood development in the past has been mainly done through in-depth assessment tools that have a longer administration time, require specialized administrator, and are extremely costly and time intensive. Well, this was not the intention here. We wanted something that countries can use to report on SDG indicator 4.2.1 as part of their ongoing monitoring effort that require the easiest possible level of implementation. So the module captures the achievement of key developmental milestones in children between the ages of 24 and 59 months. And again, this was in line with the SDG definition of indicator 4.2.1 that aims at measuring the proportion of children aged 24 to 59 months who are developmentally on track in health, learning, and psychosocial well-being. So this is essentially the idea, having an instrument the country can use, and this instrument will allow them to generate comparable data to track progress toward SDG 4.2.1. And of course, when this instrument is used together with other questions about the characteristics of the child and his or her family, it's also an instrument that can be used to report on disparities in early childhood development outcomes across children with different socioeconomic background. This is essentially a pictorial that shows the type of construct that are covered through this module. So there is an overarching concept, which is early childhood development outcomes and essentially being developmentally on track. Three domains, learning, psychosocial well-being, and health, and a number of subdomains from expressive language to literacy, numeracy, pre-writing, executive functioning, emotional and social skills, internalizing and externalizing behavior, gross motor, fine motor, and self-care. The overall instrument is comprised of 20 questions. They are meant to be used as such in their totality, and when they use as recommended, they allow countries to report on the proportion of children who are developmentally on track overall on their well-being. So this instrument is meant, as I mentioned earlier, to be integrated into nationally representative survey or regionally representative survey, in any case, representative samples. And of course, it's a questionnaire that captures children under 5. So in countries with low fertility rates, in the course or designing the survey, special consideration should be given to oversampling households with children younger than 5 years of age in case of countries with very low fertility rate. So the questionnaire is meant to be administered to the mother of the child, does not involve a direct assessment of the child. Mothers are asked to report on behavior and skills that the mothers are expected to be aware of, because they are reporting on a child on the basis of activities that are pretty much common across context and culture. It takes about 3 minutes to complete. And again, we try to come up with the shortest possible set of questions, because we know how demanding the monitoring requirements are, and we wanted something that can be easily implemented by national statistical offices. The same consideration led to design an instrument that requires minimal training, so around 3 hours for review, practice, and mock interview. It can be implemented by generic interviewers, and of course, it can be administered on paper, as well as through copy application. And if copy is chosen, of course, there has to be a separate training depending on the mode of administration. This questionnaire is meant to feed into an indicator, right? The SDG indicator 4.2.1. So a lot of time was spent in trying to determine how do we define a child as being developmentally on track? What type of cutoff do we use, considering that children are in a constant process of development in this age spectrum? So we needed to have something that was specific to the child age to determine the type of skills and milestones that the child needs to be able to demonstrate by the different age groups. So as you can see, the 20 questions are used to determine the indicator with different cutoff depending on the age of the child. So for a child, for instance, who is on the younger end spectrum, like seven items need to be endorsed. So in other words, the mother has to say, yes, my child is able to do this. 7 items in the case of a younger child, but as the children grow older, the expectations increase, of course. And in the case of the oldest children, we need to have at least 15 out of the 20 questions for which the mother report, yes, indeed, the child is able to do so. And what we are capturing here again is a child who is minimally developmentally on track. Of course, within this spectrum, there are children who are barely on track as well as high achiever. But the idea was here to be able to differentiate between those who are not on track and those who are on track. How was the instrument developed? Well, the ECDI 2030 is a testimony to the importance of partnership and bringing a number of different expertise around the table. This slide is very dense. I'm not going to go over it, but essentially show the different steps that we had to undertake over a period of 5 years to be able to go from a set of questions into a construction of the index. And of course, it all started with the review of the different questions and instruments that have been developed over time to be able to capture the different milestones for the population of children under 5. So we started with over 500 items and scales, and through an expert exercise and rating, we came down to 61 questions that then went for cognitive testing to evaluate comprehension, interpretation, and cultural adequacy of the questions. And this cognitive testing was done in Bulgaria, Mexico, Uganda, and the United States. This led to a shorter set of questions that then was field tested in Belize, Mexico, and the state of Palestine. We conducted analysis on individual items that were used in the draft set with results and data from additional 33 countries. And again, it led to a shorter set of questions that then was further reduced through psychometric analysis because some of the items were found to be redundant. And again, we were trying to come up with the shortest possible set of questions to capture the concept that we wanted to capture. So I'm gonna just take a second to show the partnership around this measure. A number of different agencies were involved. We created a task force with representative of agencies, statistical offices, academics with expertise in developing similar measures, as well as actual pediatricians and experts who have experience in assessing children, in evaluating children in the context of, for instance, learning or of a health review. So without this expertise, we would have not been able to develop a measure that, again, try to capture something particularly complex. And lastly, I wanted to close my presentation with showing what is available to promote the use of this measure. So we have translated the instrument into 8 additional languages, and you can see them here from Arabic to Chinese to Spanish. But we also have an implementation package. For all those who want to use the measure, we have tools for survey planning, including manuals for interviewers, guidelines on how to integrate this question into generic household survey, into mixed survey, etc. We have tools also for the actual field work and tools for data processing, data analysis, and report writing. The instrument is now being rolled out as part of the multiple indicator cluster survey. We have a number of surveys coming up that already have integrated the new ECDI 2030. And this is a quick overview of our website, data.unicef.org. Under the specific page dedicated to early childhood development, there is a section on the ECDI where you can find the implementation package translated in different languages. I'm going to stop here, of course, and I will be happy to answer any question you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia, and really is a good reminder also that the effort that the development of ACDI 2030 has taken and the collective action behind that. So it's really great to see that it also is landing on all the resources. And with that, we're going to hear from Manuel Cardoso, also from UNICEF, about other effort from UNICEF about measuring foundational learning skills. And all the questions you have, Manuel is going to actually to reply to all this stuff that we have about foundational learning skill in mix. So please, Manuel, over to you.
Thank you, Sylvia, for inviting us to share these, what we've called frequently asked questions on the foundational learning skills module. Where is it administered? What does it assess and how? Can it help with issues? So what is it for? It's basically to feed into SDG 4.1.1a. It was developed specifically to focus on early grades, on minimum proficiency in reading and mathematics. That is the point of basically of SDG 4.1.1a, and we started working on this while the SDGs were still being decided. So we started working on this in 2014, and therefore there may be need to expand what we actually do now to account for what ended up being part of the SDG 4.1.1 and the global proficiency framework that is ongoing, the work on the global proficiency framework that is ongoing right now. So there's a clear focus there on grades 2 and 3, which is what SDG 4.1.1a defines as early grades. Moving on to the next slide. Where is it implemented? It's implemented in households all over the world, but as João Pedro mentioned, one of the regions of the world where we have the greatest scarcity of data is Sub-Saharan Africa. And we have already 16 countries that have joined the MIX program since the sixth round was launched in 2017. And almost all of those, I think actually all of those countries have included this module, and two recent additions that we've had are Benin and Nigeria, who are going to do this with us in the next couple of years. And one important thing to say is that in some cases, there were references to the issue of language. For instance, in Paraguay mentioned the issue of language. In several of these countries, we are implementing the assessment in more than one language. For instance, in Madagascar, we did it in Malagasy and French. In Lesotho, we did it in Sesotho and English. In Zimbabwe, we did it in Shona, Ndebele, and English. So, and in some of those countries, even the same respondent does the assessment in more than one language. So we can say that it's truly a bilingual or multilingual assessment that helps us see how children perform in the language of instruction in school, in their home language, and so on. To whom? 1 7 to 14-year-old per household. Why 7 to 14 if we're focusing on grades 2 and 3? Well, because we know from other sources, from previous sources, like for instance, the citizen-led assessments, that there are children who are 14 years old and are still in school but haven't learned the basic skills or have dropped out of school. And even some who are in the appropriate grade, like a 14-year-old in 8th grade, may not have been able to learn how to read and how to do basic math. So we wanted to keep this equity perspective, although the information that is used for the SDG indicator itself only applies to the appropriate grades. There's a report building exercise because you cannot just show up, a stranger cannot just show up and assess a child. As you can see, this is different from ECDI. In ECDI, it is not possible for a stranger to walk into a household and directly interact with a 4-year-old. But it is possible, we proved that it is possible to do that with 7 to 14-year-olds. And in fact, citizen-led assessments had been doing that before us, but we proved that it's possible to do this in the context of a household survey. There's also a short learning environment survey, and then there's the foundational reading skills and foundational number skills. And as João Pedro also said, it's important to look at caregivers and other, other members of the household. So we have also a parental participation survey that precedes the foundational learning skills module itself. What is measured? Where is assessed? Well, this is the example of the last, I think this is actually the last item of each of the 4 tasks in mathematics. So you can see that it's focused on numbers, but since the Global Proficiency Framework has recommended that we also look at other areas like geometry and measurement, as well as data and algebra, we are going to try to partner to be able to add those other domains also to the assessment. What's measured on the reading side? Well, these are data for Kyrgyzstan that show that 80% of children read 90% of words correctly in a story, because we measure accuracy, but we don't measure fluency. And then 76% answers literal comprehension questions correctly, 3 literal comprehension questions. And then 67% answers 2 inferential comprehension questions correctly. And when you check all those 3 boxes, you get 1 overall indicator, which says that you have foundational reading skills if you can read at least 90% of those words and answer correctly all those 5 questions. So in Kyrgyzstan, 58% of children ages 7 to 14 were able to do that. Is it reliable? Is it valid? Is it fair? The short answer is yes. We conducted concurrent validity analysis with EGRA and EGMA, and we obtained good results. We didn't expect to be fully consistent with EGRA because it's different, but it is sufficiently similar. The reliability, as you can see, is very good. You can see some examples of Cronbach's alpha for the oral reading accuracy, the reading comprehension, and the foundational mathematical skills. And finally, in terms of is it fair to different groups, we conducted what's called differential item functioning, DIF for short, and we found that there were no differences, no diff by gender or by location, for instance. Is it useful? Does it help us understand what's going on in schools and classrooms, even though the information we get from the households? Well, we think so. What this shows is, for Sierra Leone, is that those children who are out of school in Sierra Leone basically had no reading skills, at least at this level, at this grade 2-3 level. Those who were in grade 3 only had only 8% of them actually had grade 3 skills. And even those who were in school in grade 9, what we might call grade 9 or grade 3 of lower secondary, only 86%. So not all of them had grade 3 skills. So what this shows is that we need to teach, for instance, if we have a 6th grade classroom, but in this 6th grade classroom, only about half of the students actually know how to read, we should differentiate instruction. We should teach every learner at their level. And that is what we're trying to do with a partnership called the Foundational Literacy and Numeracy Initiative with Pratham and the JPAL and Delivery Associates, among other partners. So the answers, what for? To feed into SDG 4.1.1.A. So that's what allowed us to, in 15 minutes alone of interaction with the child, to be able to answer the question, is a child minimally proficient in these areas? Where? In households everywhere. To whom? To 7 to 14-year-olds. What do we assess? We assess reading, accuracy, and comprehension, and we assess numeracy, so far focused on numbers, but we're now working with partners to improve alignment to the Global Proficiency Framework. So we will have news in this regard very soon, hopefully. And it works, it's valid concurrently with EGRA and EGMA, it's reliable, and it's fair because there is no differential item functioning. And finally, it shows the need for more equitable, inclusive policy approaches, one of which can be, for instance, teaching at the right level, teaching in the right languages. Finally, for those of you who are interested in learning more about this, there's this paper that details the process in which we got funding from the Hewlett Foundation and inputs from Aster Hueso, RTI, Save the Children, and also on the user's side, GMR, GPE, UIS, the World Bank. And the paper describes field tests in Belize, Costa Rica, Ghana, and Kenya, similar to those that Claudia described for ECDI. And finally, for those of you who are interested in the psychometric properties, this other working paper, methodological paper, shows that information about iterative reliability, concurrent validity, and so on. Thank you so much, and happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Manuel. It has been great, and it has been great also to see the connection with all the efforts that they were trying to do. Thank you so much. So with that, we're going to turn to Dirk Hartet from the International Association of Evaluation of Educational Achievement, and no need to introduce more. So Dirk was actually going to be sharing about resources and tools for measurement on developing context. Dirk, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvia, and thanks also to Michael and Joao for including me in this. For me, that was a very, very interesting afternoon with a lot of input that I got from that. So thanks for sharing all of this information. It's great. Today, I would like to talk a little bit about IEA's LANA for developing countries. The IEA's literacy and numeracy assessment is made to assess the literacy and numeracy at the end of primary school, so towards grade 4 to 6. It is designed for countries where TIMSS and PEARLS are too difficult, so we made it easier. It's also constructed mostly of multiple choice items to make the administration easier. However, it is based on the framework that we developed for TIMSS and PEARLS in terms of measuring mathematics, science, and literacy. And in the case of LANA, of course, it's only literacy and numeracy. We are measuring achievement in the regions below the low benchmark. So it's also made to for countries where also the difficulty index of international assessment might be too difficult. And finally, I would like to emphasize that the LANA package also includes background instruments for the students, but also for teachers and principals. And the major aim is not to get an achievement mean out of that, but the aim is really to help inform education policy and to improve education in participating countries. So that's our major aim. And one additional thing is it's also off cycle. So we do not have a study cycle like it's for TIMSS, PEARLS, or PISA. But LANA can be administered anytime that the education system would like to have that administered. A little bit on the development of LANA. The development of LANA started in 2015 with our partner, the TIMSS and PEARLS International Study Center at Boston College. It was based on easier TIMSS numeracy and PEARLS literacy materials. So we used actual materials that we use also in TIMSS and PEARLS. And we did some pilot studies in Haiti and Pakistan. And the pilots have shown that LANA there was too difficult. So we saw we had to develop even easier materials. And it finally more and more distinguished and faded away from being directly linked to TIMSS and PEARLS. So currently we have no common items directly in LANA with the TIMSS and PEARLS assessment itself. So we added also very easy numeracy and literacy items on word recognition and easy calculations. And LANA is now working on a concordance table to TIMSS and PEARLS. And we conducted pilot studies in Serbia, Nigeria, North Macedonia, and Haiti to get also the LANA on the same scale as we are having with TIMSS and PEARLS. About the design, it's a 1-hour assessment for the student, and we are using a rotated design. That means we have more materials than a single student gets, so they all get a share of all the materials so that we have a good content coverage in numeracy as well as in literacy. We are currently also in the process of developing a benchmark below the low international benchmark, which was originally also recognized as the minimum proficiency level that we want to measure in the SDGs. You can see here some example items. So it is made in literacy out of a short story, and then students, after reading this story, have to respond to short questions. In literacy and in numeracy, it has the area that you can see there and see if they can have easy calculations and also recognize, for example, what are fractions. So we were asked if LANA could also be adapted to household surveys and to create a shorter version. And we think that we can adapt the LANA items to measure minimal proficiency in literacy and numeracy and to be included in a household survey with a 15-minute assessment. However, if we do that, of course, what we do is that in the assessment, we would focus on what percentage of students demonstrate minimal proficiency. So who are approaching the low benchmark. So it will not be able to cover the whole range of abilities that you might find in each and every country. And to come finally to some challenges and limitations. Of course, if we go for household surveys, the testing situation might be very different, student by student, compared to having a very controlled environment that you usually find in schools. The limited testing time of 15 minutes is hugely a stretch for getting good measurement in 2 different domains. And finally, also the content coverage to cover the whole breadth of literacy and numeracy and expectation at the end of primary school is difficult to achieve. That also leads to some limitations. So we will have a very limited view on what we can assess and define as literacy and numeracy. It, of course, will be very different from a full administration of LANA with all the background instruments. And let me re-emphasize, there it's also the idea to help education system to improve the systems. Because it's IEA's opinion that we should not only emphasize in getting an international percentage of students reaching a certain benchmark, but we should not leave out of sight the final aim of these assessments, which is to improve education of students worldwide. And finally, also, what we will have is that will be very different from the TIMSS and PEARLS coverage of mathematics and reading comprehension. So with that short insight, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer all questions that you might have. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Dirk. It has been great to hear you. And with that, we invite Michael Ward from the OECD actually to talk to share some of the insights regarding the next step of PISA for D. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Over to you.
Thank you, Sylvia. So as Sylvia and João Pedro have already shown us, PISA is a source of data for global monitoring of global indicator 4.1.1.C, which is the end of lower secondary children, youth achieving at least a minimum proficiency level in reading and mathematics. And so this minimum proficiency level equates to level 2 in PISA, at least 407 points for reading and 420 points for mathematics on the PISA scale. So as João Pedro has been telling us, with colleagues from UAS, UNICEF, World Bank, and now other organizations, we've been looking at how we might adapt the PISA-D out-of-school assessment instrument that we've been talking about today, how we could adapt that as a module used in household surveys. And just to refresh your memory from 40 minutes ago, the PISA-D out-of-school assessment instrument delivered in a household by an interviewer on a tablet computer comprises a youth interview for background information on the respondent, which is about 30-35 minutes. Then a core module, which comprises 5 reading and 5 mathematics items. And then depending on whether the respondent gets 2 items correct or not, the respondent either goes to reading component if they fail to get those 2 items correct, or to a 35-minute test, which is, like Dirk was describing, Lana, a rotated design, combination of reading components, reading, mathematics, literacy items, a 35-minute test. And then this is also supplemented by more background data collected from the parent or the person most knowledgeable about respondent, and also the interviewer makes household observations on a schedule. And as Andreas was telling us right at the beginning of the workshop, the PISA-D test, the out-of-school assessment, focuses very much on the lower levels on the reading scale. So there you can see level 2, that's the minimum level of proficiency, level 1A, level 1B, level 1C. And as Andreas was saying, at level 1C, the respondent can decode and understand short sentences. And that's where we found most of the out-of-school in PISA-D were performing. And similarly, on the mathematics scale, the PISA-D assessment targets these lower levels below level 2 to level 1A, level 1B, level 1C. So in terms of the module for integrating with household surveys, we're designing this now. And like I said earlier, we hope to have the test ready by January or February. We're basically taking the PISA-D assessment and the items used there and basically constructing this test from those items. So it's going to be much shorter. So it will be a youth interview, much shorter youth interview of 5 minutes to get some basic background data, and then a much shorter test, which would not be a rotated design. At the moment, we're not considering the rotated design. It would be about 8 to 9 reading, 8 to 9 mathematics items drawn from the PISA-D pool, and would be a combination of reading components, reading and mathematical literacy items. The purpose of this test is just one sole purpose, which is to discriminate whether respondents are above or below the level 2 in PISA reading, level 2 in mathematics, which is the minimum level of proficiency, the SDG4 benchmark. And the test scores would be linked to the PISA scale as we've done them through the PISA-D assessment. So this module would be administered to 14 to 16-year-old youth everywhere, whether they're in school or out of school, but it would be delivered in households by a survey interviewer, would be administered on a tablet computer like we've done with the PISA-D out of school assessment, but it could also be delivered on paper, and that results of a paper test could be transferred to the interviewer's tablet computer immediately after the test. So it would be an option to go with computer test or paper test. The interviewer would administer the test immediately, or as we found in PISA-D, may need to schedule an interview and make a return visit to household to administer the assessment. And as João Pedro says, we're looking at phone-delivered assessments, and we think there's potential for this short PISA-D module to be administered on a phone, and that would, of course, avoid a return visit by the interviewer to the household. So the next steps, as I say, is to finish our test design and to complete that by January, February 2021. And then we're going to hear at the end of this session, Jero, who's going to talk to us about the next steps for this work program as a whole. So I won't steal Jero's thunder, but just simply say that our next steps in taking this module forward would be in company with all the agencies today in terms of this work program we're calling Measuring Learning Through the Life Cycle in Multi-Topic Household Surveys. So thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you so much, Michael. It has been really very clear, and we have now to turn to the UIL, to Nicolas Jonas from the UIL, and actually hearing now about youth and adults and trying to see what is the...
Thank you, Sylvia. Bonjour à tous et merci pour cette invitation. Je vais vous présenter ici l'instrument permettant de mesurer les compétences des adultes âgés de 16 à 65 ans. Donc on se positionne ici dans la cible 4.6 des objectifs de développement durable, qui précise que d'ici à 2030, on doit s'assurer à ce que tous les jeunes aient une certaine proportion d'adultes atteignent un niveau minimum en alphabétisme et en numératie. Donc, il y a un seul indicateur qui est associé à cette cible, il s'agit de l'indicateur 4.6.1 qui va, lui, s'intéresser au pourcentage de la population adulte qui réussit à atteindre ce niveau minimum de compétences. Comme on l'a évoqué rapidement tout à l'heure, dans l'ensemble des objectifs de développement durable, enfin des cibles de l'objectif 4, on a des problèmes plus ou moins aigus de couverture des données. Et ce problème est encore plus prononcé pour l'indicateur 4.6.1. Je vous ai représenté ici sur cette carte du monde l'état actuel des instruments de mesure des compétences tels qu'ils existent. Donc on est seulement à 13% des pays qui aujourd'hui ont des données sur l'alphabétisme issues de compétences d'évaluation directe. Et la majorité de ces pays sont couverts par le programme PIAC de l'OCDE. Et c'est d'ailleurs pour ça que pour l'indicateur 4.6.1, il a été convenu que ce serait le niveau de compétence PIAC niveau 2 qui serait retenu comme point de référence international. Au-delà de l'enquête PIAC, on a d'autres instruments de mesure qui sont en cours ou qui n'existent plus mais qui ont existé récemment, la plupart étant déjà liés à PIAC. Il s'agit déjà du programme STEP de la Banque mondiale, du programme LAMP de l'UIS. Et puis, nous avons un certain nombre de pays qui ont également leurs propres évaluations qui peuvent être utiles dans le cadre de cet indicateur 4.6. Je vous ai indiqué également une autre initiative, l'initiative RAMA, qui a le mérite d'exister dans 12 pays d'Afrique de l'Ouest, mais dans son état actuel, il ne permet pas d'évaluer la compétence de l'ensemble de la population, puisqu'il se limite simplement à l'évaluation des acquis des bénéficiaires des programmes d'alphabétisation. Mais il aura un des projets est de réussir à généraliser le projet RAMA pour en faire des enquêtes nationales. Donc, si on revient un peu sur les qualités et les limites de ces instruments qui existent, donc l'enquête PIAC qui va débuter prochainement son troisième cycle a montré l'ensemble de ses qualités, mais il a aussi montré qu'il était très bien construit pour capturer notamment les niveaux de compétences les plus élevés. Et c'est également un instrument qui réclame un effort absolument considérable de la part des pays. Déjà, c'est une enquête relativement longue en temps, mais qui s'appuie également sur des capacités techniques et un niveau d'expertise que tous les pays n'ont pas à disposition. L'enquête STEP, qui est en quelque sorte la petite sœur de PIAC, dans la mesure où elle a été construite avec des items communs, pourrait être une solution envisageable à généraliser dans la mesure où il a déjà été testé dans des pays à revenus moyens, mais un de ses problèmes principaux est qu'il couvre uniquement l'alphabétisme. Or, la cible 4.6 fait bien référence à l'alphabétisme et à la numératie. Il nous reste donc LAMP, le projet de l'Institut de l'UNESCO pour la statistique, qui malheureusement n'existe plus, mais qui a été lancé avec succès dans un certain nombre de pays à niveau faible et niveau moyen, et qui a, par une méthodologie qui lui était propre, qui a montré en tout cas la faisabilité de l'administration et de l'implémentation de ce type d'enquête dans des pays habituellement plus difficiles à enquêter. Si on revient justement très rapidement sur LAMP, il a été développé spécifiquement pour les pays cibles, pour les pays pour lesquels la couverture de données est le plus problématique. Et 10 pays notamment ont testé cet outil. 4 d'entre eux ayant pu aller jusqu'au terme du programme, c'est-à-dire jusqu'à l'implantation de l'enquête finale, donc la Jordanie, la Mongolie, la Palestine et le Paraguay. Ce qui est intéressant, du coup, c'est qu'avec une telle diversité de pays qui ont déjà testé LAMP, on a désormais un ensemble d'items d'évaluation qui ont été développés dans plusieurs langues et dans plusieurs systèmes graphiques. Donc, ce qui permet d'avoir une base pour construire un nouvel outil plus adapté à la cible qu'on voudrait atteindre. Donc, justement, si on fait un petit peu le bilan de LAMP et des expériences passées avec cet outil dans les 10 pays qui ont testé cet instrument, un ensemble de réflexions s'est engagé sur la possibilité d'alléger, de faciliter, finalement de mieux adapter cet instrument au contexte des pays en voie de développement. Donc, il y a 5 domaines principaux sur lesquels les réflexions ont porté. Donc, à savoir, est-ce qu'il fallait enquêter l'ensemble des domaines, c'est-à-dire la littératie et la numératie, ou seulement un d'entre eux, ou se limiter plutôt à au niveau de compétences les plus bas, comme certains de mes collègues ont évoqué pour d'autres enquêtes, ce qui semble être une bonne solution. D'autres réflexions ont porté sur l'échantillonnage, sur la méthode d'approche et sur la nécessité ou non d'avoir un programme centralisé où plusieurs pays font en même temps l'enquête, ou au contraire si on pouvait décaler dans le temps et laisser à chaque pays le choix de la fenêtre d'opportunité la plus utile pour eux pour pouvoir lancer ce type d'enquête. Au bout ces réflexions ont permis donc l'élaboration d'un nouvel outil beaucoup plus léger, donc qui a été appelé Minilamp, qui se propose à travers une architecture relativement simple, composée de 15 items, qui se propose de mesurer la littératie et la numératie des adultes, accompagné d'un questionnaire biographique permettant de mieux comprendre les performances obtenues par les personnes enquêtées. En plus de cet ensemble d'items retenus de LAMP, l'UIS a produit un certain nombre de documentations qui permet au pays d'être autonome dans l'implantation de cette enquête. Il s'agit notamment d'un ensemble de documentation technique expliquant les processus de qualité à suivre pour pouvoir implémenter cette enquête, et aussi la mise à disposition d'un outil statistique permettant d'estimer les scores de compétences sans avoir recours à des procédures longues des enquêtes plus traditionnelles. L'enquête Minilamp telle qu'elle existe n'a pas encore été testés sur les terrains en tant que tels, c'est-à-dire les items ont déjà été dans le cadre de LAMP, mais la nouvelle architecture ainsi composée ne l'a pas encore été. C'est dans les projets de le faire prochainement, mais elle offre des avantages supplémentaires par rapport à l'outil précédent, à LAMP, c'est-à-dire que c'est un outil qui est encore très adaptable aux besoins des pays. Composé de 15 items, il serait relativement aisé d'adapter ces items au contexte de chaque pays et éventuellement d'ajouter un module supplémentaire selon les besoins exprimés par les pays, notamment pour pouvoir couvrir les franges les plus basses des compétences en alphabétisme. Par ailleurs, son architecture relativement simple permettrait une adaptation sur différents types de supports. Donc ça, c'est un des axes de recherche qu'on va développer à l'Institut de l'UNESCO pour l'apprentissage tout au long de la vie l'année prochaine. Essayer de développer l'IMP à la fois pour une passation par téléphone et aussi par Internet sans le recours à un enquêteur pour une interrogation en face à face. Donc, cette approche par le mini-lump permettrait, dans l'approche qui a été décrite tout à l'heure, à savoir une collaboration plus forte entre les différentes organisations internationales pour utiliser un outil commun permettant d'allouer les outils d'évaluation des compétences les plus adéquates. On réfléchit également au sein du groupe de travail sur l'indicateur 4.6 à une approche, on va dire, intérimaire, c'est-à-dire que même si on pense que l'approche actuellement prônée a de grandes chances de produire des résultats très positifs, Michael l'a bien présenté tout à l'heure, ne serait-ce que pour Pisadi, l'effort qui est demandé au pays pour réussir à atteindre la cible d'intérêt pour chacune de ces enquêtes reste relativement conséquent et on peut penser qu'au moins à court terme, de nombreux pays ne pourront pas fournir ce type d'effort. Donc l'approche du groupe de travail est de se dire qu'il y a peut-être besoin de développer une stratégie qui soit intérimaire, mais qui soit plus pragmatique pour pouvoir obtenir également, dans un premier temps, des données comparables sur l'alphabétisme et la numératie des adultes, étant bien entendu que ces données ne seront ni aussi riches ni aussi précises que celles qu'on pourrait obtenir par une évaluation directe des compétences. Donc l'idée dans ce cas-là, c'est d'organiser un workshop très prochainement pour proposer une version améliorée des questions auto-déclarées telles qu'elles existent actuellement dans les enquêtes nationales pour mesurer le niveau d'alphabétisme des adultes et d'y adjoindre des questions sur le niveau de numératie qui pour l'instant n'existe pas. Donc c'est un travail qui reste à faire, c'est un travail qui s'inscrirait que dans comme je l'ai déjà dit, une stratégie intérimaire, puisque la stratégie à long terme étant toujours de réussir à encourager les pays à plutôt se tourner vers des évaluations directes des compétences. Voilà, merci à tous.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much, Nicola, for your presentation. It has been very clear, and I do think that it offers a clear vision of an opportunity to try to actually to measure in the lowest level of the skills. And with that, I would like to invite Jero Carleto, the colleagues from the World Bank and actually working in the data division and with so much experience in household service. Jero, over to you.
Thank you. A lot of the things that I was about to say had been said already. So a lot about the initiative, the collaboration has been introduced. But I just want to kind of a little bit frame the collaboration in a slightly different way and contribute a couple of thoughts on the work that we're doing. So obviously, from all the discussions that we have had until now, so it is clear that what we are trying to achieve, or what we're trying to address is one is the lack of data for out of school. As Andrea was saying at the beginning, more than 50% of kids that are out of school. But one of the challenges here, as I see from this discussion, and I think it's become clear, I think, from these discussions as well, is how we achieve scale in these things. So we heard that from different presentations, we're working certain teams are working 10 countries, some in 5 countries. So how do we achieve scale? And how do we achieve scale in a sustainable way, in a cost-effective way, which is what this morning Margaret was hinting to. And I think this is kind of the challenge. As João Pedro was saying, we're not trying to substitute that, we're trying to complement the existing learning assessment mostly for in-school, current effort to add some out of school. But I think at the same time, what we're trying to think in this initiative is like how we can implement and develop and implement tools that can be done at scale. But also, again, it is clear, it's also what we're trying to achieve is a consolidation of tools. So there was a comment in the chat, actually, which I think was very timely, which was asking, so there's a large proliferation of assessment. How do countries choose? How do we help countries in choose among the different tests? And I think this is also another thing that the initiative is trying to do, is also trying to consolidate this knowledge, this understanding in a series of practical guidelines for countries to be able to make informed decisions. But also, again, the big challenge here among this proliferation is also achieve some harmonization. And when I talk about harmonization, I don't mean only harmonization of instrument, so of the test, of the assessment, but also harmonization in the field protocols, in quality assurance. So to me, it's a lot has to do with technical issues, but it's also, there's a lot of institutional issues that we're trying to address through this partnership. But finally, I think one ulterior motive, at least from where I stand as a manager of the LSMS, is also how we add value to household surveys. So how can we increase the value addition, the fitness of purpose of surveys like the LSMS and multi-topic household surveys, using their strength, but also at the same time through the initiative address some of the potential weaknesses. Next. So everybody, so already Sylvia and João Pedro mentioned the workshop that we had in February, which follow months of discussions. And I think one personal reflection on the workshop, and I think it is shared by many of the participants, is that the high level of the large level of consensus among the different stakeholders, among the different partners of what needs to be done. So I think that was again, maybe surprisingly, I'm not sure if it's the right word, like I just said, the agreement. And the consensus on a number of our next steps, and then also on the utility of and the usefulness of pursuing the initiative. And in terms of next steps, so what we are working on currently is in preparing a stock-taking document to inventory a bit the available learning assessment tools, the past experiences with the integration, but also now with COVID, obviously the whole landscape is a bit upended. So kind of assess also the suitability of using different modes of data collection, whether it's phone surveys, but also it was mentioned in one of the questions before, the use of citizen science, a citizen-led assessment. So among the steps is also the establishment of a task force to develop a roadmap that will take us where we want to go. And as I was saying before, ultimately it is about creating a toolkit, a set of guidelines to give countries options on what's feasible and what's suitable what it's fit for purpose. And as a last part of the initiative before a full scale up is the identification of 2-3 countries to pilot the different tools. Next. So this has been a lot has been said already. So I will just want to mention a couple of things, like in terms of what are the driving principles. So because again, what we're trying to achieve here is scale. So in order to achieve scale with the available tools, with the available with the available platforms, not the tool, with the available survey platforms. So we need to obviously come up with some common denominators, things that they can be achieved at scale. And another driving principle, again, is this focus on the foundational skills. So like we're not trying to capture everything, we're going to try to capture only individual abilities that meet a certain minimum threshold. So which is also a way to kind of narrow down and zero in and prioritize. So also it is important in this process, as I was saying before when I was referring to harmonization, it is important to also evaluate different field implementation protocols and understand the trade-offs. Because, for example, when we talked about the main objective of this initiative is to come up with short modules that can be integrated in household survey. By integration means a lot of things here. So you can have a short assessment, which is fully integrated in a survey as it happens, but also there are ways to complement in sequentially the field work, taking advantage of the field infrastructure. So that's where we come in with achieving cost effectiveness and reducing cost in fielding learning assessment. And again, so while the objective is to come up with short assessment, so nothing precludes us in some countries, if the conditions are there, to field a full assessment. But again, the challenge, the opportunity here is like how do we link this full assessment with the household survey. So next. Again, probably I don't need to convince anyone on the potential advantages, but let me go through what we see as the potential advantages of this approach. And again, which is not to substitute, but it's only to complement what has been done with learning assessment. One is clearly to have information on full population, but also to allow the comparison between in and out a population in and out of school. Also, like the matching the assessment with the rich data set that comes from multi-topic surveys. We collect information both at the individual, at the household level, as well as at the community level. Because clearly both environmental factors become important. Also, I heard a lot today in the discussions of the word equity. So when we talk about equity, we want to think about distributional impact of certain policies. So therefore, we need to think about welfare measurement in the household we collect data from. And this is why the advantage of linking assessment to a national survey clearly has great analytical advantages. So one point that I want to emphasize, which kind of also, it comes from a very recent experience with the COVID, is like the availability of instruments like a household survey in countries, particularly if you have a systems of household survey, gives a lot of flexibility in terms of adapting the tools, adapting the questions, adapting the country priority to respond to specific policy questions. So If you think about a survey like an LSMS or also a mix where you can think of rotating modules, in some countries we have a panel data set, which is something which wasn't discussed, it's not been discussed about this, but we want to think also of the advantages of following cohort through panel data set, which are now much more available than in the past. So also like the possibility to link the household data the way we already do in other areas for other purposes with the community and facility information. So this is particularly important, particularly for in-school kids. So where you have the opportunity to link the household level data with the facility level information where the kid goes to school. And but one point which I think it was important also it emerged during the discussion with the countries is also gives an opportunity. For example, in the case of Guatemala or like the other countries that presented today, it's like how we integrate this assessment within the national data systems. And this is also a way to ensure sustainability in country buy-in. Last, final slide. So in terms of some points for discussion and next steps, I mean, I cover and it's been covered many of these topics already. So as I was saying, so we are proceeding with the stock taking exercise. There is a research and development part in coming up with this short module. So there is a lot of work going on. I think the initiative is more about consolidating a lot of this knowledge, the identification of our country, but kind of thinking more longer term or medium term. It's like thinking about best delivery mechanism and survey program to accelerate the uptake in countries. Of course, needless to say, all this thing costs money. So we also need to think about what is the best way, the best financing mechanism to support such a scale up. And for that it becomes important, for example, to try to identify linkages with the programmatic, with programs, and in the case of the bank, for example, it could be also linked with either support or special facility for vulnerable countries. So in a way, we also need to think about, if we want to scale this thing up, to think about the financing, the idea, a better financing to support this thing. And then finally on the timeline, obviously with COVID, a lot of these things kind of got appended, but I think we hope that at least in terms of the face-to-face to be able to return to the field. And we already returned to the field in the next couple of months, but also as JP and Michael were mentioning, as if we're thinking a lot more about how to use the recent experience with the high frequency phone surveys to see how we can integrate some of these short tests into phone surveys. I'll stop there and happy to answer any question. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Jero. I think it has been very comprehensive, and we would like to actually have a few questions. I think that we're a little bit short of time, but I will ask the privilege you reply to some of the questions that already appear in the chat. I would like to actually to know, Joao Pedro, to you, what exactly does it mean to do a test over a phone? Can you explain what practically it means to us?
Sure, Sylvia. I think it basically it's a phone interview, right? So it depends on the issue, right? And there are different. I think in the perspective that we are taking here, right? For an instrument such as CDI, which it's a parent response, right? It's a relatively straightforward exercise, right? Because we're already interviewing the parent, and in that context, basically the same questions that would be done on a face-to-face could easily potentially be translated into a phone interview, right? I think when we move to direct assessment measures, right, such as the learning aspects that we are discussing here, the situation gets a bit more challenging, right? But it's still, I think it's worth exploring, right? Now of course, there are two options in those cases, right? One is an interview, which again, maybe for the adult population, if you're interested in functional measures of literacy, might be, potentially okay, but you still want to need to send them some kind of reading material, right? Or maybe you can just describe a situation on numeracy, and then expect the result, right? I would imagine that numeracy might be easier than reading, right? Now, of course, there's also the option of using text, so SMS, or even online, right? Which then I think puts us in a completely different situation, right? Which will be significantly more straightforward. So I think the bottom line, I think, is different for math than it is for reading, right? Because you can describe a mathematical problem over the phone and probe the response, and you can frame the problem as a day-to-day numeracy challenge, as opposed to just numbers and formulas. I think reading is probably going to be more challenging and would probably require some kind of SMS or text. But I think that this is part of what we need to figure out, right? I think there are different examples going on, but yeah, I'll leave it here.
Okay, thank you so much, Pedro. And we see that there are some questions, but we're running out of time. And thank you so much, because there has been many insights. And with that, I will hand over to Michael Ward to close the webinar. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry that we've run out of time as questions have started to come in, but we are limited with the time that we have. So let me just very briefly summarize what I think we've done today. I think we've been successful in reviewing the results of the PISA-D household survey pilot. And we've looked at this in the context of SDG 4 and touched on the COVID-19 situation. We've definitely reviewed the results and country experiences of the out-of-school assessment and had some really very nice presentations from the 5 countries. And we've also discussed the next steps in taking this pilot forward, in particular as a learning assessment module of a national household survey. And we spent the last part of the workshop discussing the program of work for measuring learning through the life cycle in multi-topic national household surveys. It's of course a great shame that this workshop has been a virtual one, rather than the 3-day face-to-face event that we had originally planned. But I think despite these restrictions, we've managed to cover a great deal of the ground we had originally identified for the face-to-face meeting. And I hope all of the participants that have been with us today have gained a good understanding of what we've achieved through the PISA-D out-of-school assessment, and have a good understanding of the next steps for taking this forward, especially the measuring learning through household surveys. If participants in this meeting have unanswered questions or would like more information, please don't hesitate to reach out to me by email or just give me a call. We will issue a summary record of the meeting next week, and all of the presentations made today will be uploaded to our PISA for Development web pages. So it just leaves me really now to thank everyone for their contributions to today's event. People have been very generous with their time to join us today, and you know, I think it's been a very productive workshop. But I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank some of the people who've made PISA-D possible. From our very first international meeting, which was in Paris in 2014, you can see the group on the left of the screen. And our last face-to-face meeting, which took place in Guatemala, although some of us were together in London last September in 2019. So I think, first of all, we must thank the countries, the 9 countries that took part in the PISA-D, in addition to the 5 who did the out-of-school assessment, and particularly the ministers, very bold ministers of education, as Andreas and I think Margaret said at the beginning. It's a bold step for a minister to take part in an assessment like this, especially looking at the out-of-school and acknowledging the excluded in a country education system. So I think the commitment, dedication, particularly of the national centres, the people who spoke this afternoon, those 5 people came from these 5 of these national centres, and they really have gone the extra mile to complete this assessment, especially the out of school. And their performance over the life of this project has been phenomenal, really, really fantastic performance of all the country teams. Second, I really must appreciate the work of the international contractors, ETS, the Learning Bar, WestStep, Pearson, Capstone, without whom really none of this work that we've been talking about today would have been possible. So thank you very much to the contractors. And the other key set of partners for the project are the development partners. We've had support from everybody that you can see here, from France, Germany, GPE, Ireland, Japan, Korea, Microsoft, Norway, Porticus Foundation, Positivo, Sunny Barkey Foundation, the UK, Inter-American Development Bank, and the World Bank. And really, without that support, none of this really would have been possible. Not just the financial support, but the technical support and the general support for what we've done. And then another very important group is the institutional partners that you can see on the right here for their technical support, the sharing of instruments and approaches, and just general support. We had, like I said, many meetings around the world, and UNESCO colleagues, especially UNICEF colleagues, the regional assessments all played a huge part in making those meetings a success. So thank you for that. And then finally, I guess to thank the PISA Governing Board for approving this initiative and supporting it, making it possible, and especially the PISA participants who performed the role of peer learning partners, which was a big part of the capacity building in PISA-D. And all those countries you can see there, Canada, Chile, Dominican Republic, France, Germany, Korea, Kosovo, Luxembourg, Mexico, Peru, Spain, Uruguay, United States. The PISA teams in those countries and the PISA Governing Board representatives of those countries all played a big part at different stages in sharing their experience and offering guidance. And of course, the PISA Technical Advisory Group provided also considerable technical guidance for everything we've done and validated everything we've done. So PISA-D has been an incredible journey. And while the project is ending now, the partnerships we've established will continue and are being carried forward in PISA and the work that we spent the last hour and a half discussing with the other agencies in support of SDG 4 monitoring. So with that, those words of thanks, I bring the workshop to a close. And thank you very, very much for all your contributions and participation.